Before we jump into stuff today, I'm just gonna quickly pull something up. So I took what I showed you guys last week, and I added a little bit more to it. It's not too much fancier. Let's see if I can pull this up. Ooh, hold up. Okay, we'll do it this way. Just gonna have to stream.
If you guys come into class late, ping me because if anyone ever comes in late, just.
So hopefully you guys can see that. Is that all popping up for you guys?
Yeah.
Cool, bro. So it's a pretty simple scene. I added some kind of camera angles, some smooth lerping. I've also added some props in, and then I've added some really simple UI. Obviously, I can hit the X button or this button up here to close. If I press F, it's going to fire. So you get this. And that's the effect. As well, I've got some kind of like nice to have features. So like I can press R and the props respawn back in. I can obviously press W to change the time speed. So this is half time. This is 10% time. This is very slow. So if I press F to fire now, you can see that this effect is very slowly coming in over here. I'll make it a bit faster. So hopefully you guys will be able to use this to examine the effect a bit more thoroughly. By no means is this like a perfect submission or a perfect setup. There's definitely some stuff here that, looking at this in hindsight, I'm not like super happy with. It's a bit of unpolished bits here. The crack over here is like, meh, it's not the best. But it's, I think, pretty satisfactory. Kind of has all the elements you need. There's some like cool vertex displacement stuff. There's camera shake, there's particle systems, there's this nice glowing ripple effect, and they affect the rigid bodies as well, and cool. So what I'll do is I'll drop that into the class folders. I don't think this is going to show up in the recording very well, so you guys can take this build and you can play around with it. I'm not going to give you the source code, but you're welcome to have like a really deep dive into it, especially when you're playing at very fast, like slow speeds. You'll be able to get a really good read of how things happen. Like if you go at this speed, you can very clearly see what's happening here. It's a lot easier to break down the effect as a whole when you start to see it in this very slow motion. So you can see, at this point, this thing expands outwards and it gets big, and then shrinks down. And keep in mind, you're traveling at 100 speed here, so this is all very fast in actual play. You've got sort of like kind of twinkles left behind, and it sits there for a second or so. Keeps sitting there, keeps shrinking just a tiniest bit more, and then eventually, I had to adjust this. This was very fast in the original playthrough, but now it's painfully slow when you're playing it at 100 speed. So you can see, even in that small example, right, that bullet traveled very fast to the wall. It has sat here for relatively a very long time, and then now it explodes. You see these big kind of shards come out. There's a big white glow. There's a pulsing kind of ring that expands outwards. It gives you this very nice clean effect. At this point, the twinkles have mostly died off in the space, and then that's when you start to see as well these wall cracks come out of the wall that help to really sell the fact that it's really breaking the terrain. And obviously if the props were back here as well, this is when they would get affected, and that gives it a lot more kind of, I guess, makes it feel a lot more real and sells it a lot more. And you can see that the shards fade out from the middle, and that kind of helps to sell it as well. So so let me exit that, and I'll swap back to sharing my other screen. Cool. This is like, keep in mind, this is like my absolute first attempt at doing a visual effect of this nature. Like I've never done anything of this sort. And by no means is visual effects my real area of expertise. So I understand that there's a lot that works really well there, and I know there's some kind of cool code stuff like the timestamp stuff and the camera swapping that's maybe a little bit more polished than I expect from you guys, but I am 100% convinced that you guys can build something that looks as interesting and visually well. And okay, aim high, guys. Programming. I'm a developer by trade. I've done a lot of work with shaders and stuff though, so I think that probably does help quite a bit. I think that the key thing though is you've got to keep in mind with that with those shaders and stuff, there are 2 textures and just a handful of very, very simple pieces of geometry. One sec, hold up. Yeah, to continue on the point I was making, when you look at the effect very slowly, I think when you look at any effect very slowly, you'll start to see that a lot of really well-formed effects are actually very simple. I think even the effect that I built there is probably quite overbaked. It probably doesn't need like the twinkle effects. It probably does maybe need something on the player to kind of show that they've just shot, like maybe like some smoke coming off or something like that. And even looking at the wall explosion, there's a lot of parts there, and I'm not sure I really need about half of them. And there's a lot of like duplication of parts as well. So the same thing that does the big kind of explosion lines from the player is the same thing that does the explosion lines on the wall. The same thing that does the explosion cones on the player is the same thing that does the explosion cones on the wall. The cracks are like a custom 3D model, but I'm sure you guys can model a 3D mesh that matches a crack. And the crack texture I used across the entire project is the same everywhere. So there's nothing new there. Is that gonna open that? Oh yeah, it has opened that project, that's why. Okay. So cool. Let's today we're gonna tackle something a little bit different. Hopefully this will still reattach. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna chuck all of this stuff into week 9. And I'm gonna make a new folder, week 10. Really quickly though, did I drop the build? No, I didn't drop the build. Okay, let me do that really quickly. So yeah, I'll drop the build, and as well, I'm gonna drop the full brief for the component into the chat. Where did that one go? Hold up, somewhere in here. Cool, and let me give you that build as well. So yeah, so feel free to play around with this build. Again, I think we're gonna be a lot more lenient on. Yeah, it probably is. If it's already pinned. Yeah, it is already pinned. I actually think that one that I posted is totally fine. What I might do is I might just unpin the other one, and I'll just pin this one. It's exactly the same, but the only difference is I've just changed it from 19022 to 20022. The date is in fact the same, so keep in mind that it's due on the 15th of May, which is in 2 weeks' time. So we're going to have this week's class and next week's class, and then you're going to have until 1 p.m. on the 15th of May, so you have before 2 weeks away from class. Again, keep in mind that there's a lot of parts to the like VFX that I built, and if you want to just build something that's a bit more simple and has less parts to it, maybe like an auto attack or something like that, it's still really important to nail that effect and make sure that it's really comprehensive and has all those elements, has a wind up, has an actual effect for the particle, and then has a post effect. But you could obviously make something that's maybe a little bit less world shaking, and maybe something that's a little bit less overwhelming in terms of power, to ensure that you don't have to build quite as many components. And let me share that link for you guys. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, feel free to download that. It's only like 15 megabytes or so, or actually 21. Yeah. Cool. So let's get started. So let's talk about, first of all, what we're going to be tackling today, because we want to be tackling the animator, and that's pretty much how the project I showed you was set up. If I'll pull it up in the background real quick, but it's very simple. All I did was I set up two animation clips. I set up an animator to swap between them, and then I keyframed the hell out of it. So if I just pull this over here for a second, here is the animation for the explosion. It's a mess, if I'm perfectly honest. If I saw this in my own project or in a student's mark, I would not be very happy with this. It's understandably confusing and messy in some areas, but there are some things that should be a lot cleaner. For instance, this stuff down here is all needless. This is just poor planning on my behalf. So keep in mind that obviously it's important to make sure the effect works, but it's also important to make sure that the effect works in a way that is easy for you to iterate, because there's definitely some pain points when I was adjusting, for instance, this downtime where it's sitting on the wall without doing anything, and trying to change that when you don't have this properly set up is very frustrating. So do yourself a favor, make sure that the animations that you work with are relatively clean. Cool. So we'll go back to the other one. Let's go ahead and let's make...
Austin,
Yep, shoot.
which render pipeline are we using today?
We're using universal render pipeline. I think up above, I think I pinned a... Oh, maybe I didn't. Does everyone here have a build of Unity with shader graph that's 2019.3.7 and has universal render pipeline?
If it's universal render pipeline, do we have to enable shader graph, or is it automatically enabled?
You shouldn't have to enable it. It should be automatically set up. When you load in, you should have this thing on the right hand side. Or also, I think maybe sometimes you maybe have to click like show tutorial instructions if you've closed it. But that should bring up this little window over here if you've done it correctly. Does everyone have that on their end? If not, let me give you a link to a template project. That link is a template project. If you are struggling to have everything set up, or everything's like real whack in your build, I know 2019 can be like pretty fussy. I know I myself had some issues working with 2019 getting it to build properly. I would just recommend using the template. I literally just unzipped the template and added the workshop files from last week into this project to work on today. So that's what I'm working within at least. What I did for context was I opened up Unity Hub, I went new, I went universal project template, gave it a name, hit create, and you wouldn't be able to see the little initializing project template window and stuff, but obviously a progress bar pops up and that eventually loads and opens your project for you. Cool. Sweet. So let's go ahead and make an animator. We'll go down here, right click in the project view as per usual to create an asset. I'm going to go create. I'm going to go down. I'm going to go animator controller. And I'm going to call this, let's just call this VFX, because this animator is just going to control all of it, or all about the parts of our visual effect. And I'm then going to go create animation. And for now, let's just make an animation called loop. That's quite alright, no worries. Yeah, the 2019's load times are quite slow, unfortunately. But once you've done that, once you've built that new project and stuff, this is what you should jump into immediately. You should be into this little weird test bench scene, which I think is just light map baking now. Yep. Cool. Let me post a little because while you guys are opening, I go ahead and just make a new scene. Just make a new main scene. So just right click, create scene, or just go file, new scene. Make sure you save it, obviously, please. I don't want to hear the pain of you guys tearing your hair out over not having a scene ready. Okay. Well, while we wait for those, just please update the poll when you're good, when Unity's all loaded, and we'll chat about just general visual effects breakdown in the meantime. So to go back to, let me see if I can pull it up. Here we go. So to go back to this example, you see that actually when he starts to break this effect down, it's not really made out of that many parts. You know, we've got a glow, right, which is nothing miraculous. Let's pull this forward. Here's our glow, right? And we've got a bunch of little particle effects, little twinkles that shimmer and shine. Really like how they've done them with theirs, by the way. Better than my ones for sure. Then they've got a line, right? These are all parts I'm thoroughly confident that your visual aesthetic skills and your drawing skills will hopefully not be put to task over building. And then there's a slightly faded out darker red color, which adds some body and volume to the arrow. And then here's those two pieces interlaid. And then I believe this next piece is, yeah, a big soft glow. And then finally, arguably the most complex part of this effect are these winding trails. Now, the interesting thing here is you could solve this problem a variety of ways. You could, for instance, solve it by building a procedural mesh. That would be a solution. But I would haphazard to say that would be a solution that would be well and truly beyond your technical capabilities, but also totally redundant. Evidently, I'm sure any of you could build a strip and then use a modifier or even just manually rotate the vertices so that you have a spiral shape, then duplicate it 3 times or twice to have multiple spinning around the same shape. Then it'd just be a matter of rotating it around a pivot point, kind of like we did a long time ago when we had that little bullet particle. And then, just like that, right, we have our magical little strips rotating around. And in fact, if you look at their demonstration, they actually spawn them one by one. They don't magically unwrap them or unwind them or even move them really that much in space. They move a little bit and they kind of rotate a bit, but maybe even they stretch out a bit as well. But they don't seem to be building new faces or anything of the sort. It's just spawning a new mesh, presumably, and then moving some UVs. Cool. And so you can see that creates this really nice spiraling effect as the arrow travels. And then you can see, yeah, with that together. And again, you know, there's some very simple principles applied here. They're using an additive shader rather than a multiplicative shader or a pre-multiplied shader or an alpha shader. Because what does that do? Well, bright color plus bright color creates really bright colors, right? With additive. It doesn't just blend to the true color. So it creates these nice little pink highlights here, which is a really nice tone, and does the same, you know, down here. It gives the illusion of at least of it glowing, and then and then finally, I think there's one more, which is the same thing but a darker color, right? Which is the practice that they just used previously to make it feel bolder and more voluminous. And then they put it all together. That's not rocket science by any means, and this is a AAA studio building a AAA product that's arguably one of the most popular games in the world. So, although it may be very scary looking at this at times and saying, I have to build that, trust that when you break down these effects, I really, really recommend going to this person's YouTube channel and having a look if you're scared, because the effects he's breaking down are pretty universal. Or if they're not universal, then make them universal by choosing an effect like this that you think you can recreate or build by looking at examples and looking at really clear crystal breakdowns from people like this. Cool. Cool, I think that's pretty much good to go. So let's go back. So I'll do those two things again. So we hit right-clicked in the project view. I hit create. I'm gonna make a new scene first. I'm just gonna call this week 9. Oh, thanks for the link, Miles. Much appreciated. Week 10, sorry, because that's actually what the week is. And then I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna right-click. I'm gonna hit create, and I'm gonna create animator. So I'm gonna call this VFX, and this is gonna contain all of our animations for our visual effects. And then I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna right-click and go create animation. And I'm just gonna call this loop. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna double-click on the VFX, and that's gonna open up this tab up here called animator. I'm gonna drag these windows around real quick. So here's our animator. So when you open that animator for the first time, you're gonna see that we have these 3 states. I'm gonna go ahead and just drag them together because I'm fussy like that, but you're by no means obliged to do that. Now, what happens here is these are 3 core states that define behaviors that almost any animator could have, like how do you transition from any state? Well, you have to move from the any state. How do you transition from the entry? Well, you come from the entry. How do you transition to the exit? Or I don't think you can transition from the exit. Well, you go to this, right? So we're going to go ahead and we've got this little animation loop. I'm just going to drag this in. And when you do that, it's going to highlight orange, and a little arrow is going to connect from the entry to the loop animation. And this is just saying, hey, when you enter this animator, when this animator begins, it's going to start playing the loop animation. So we know that when we enter this, when this animator is active on a component and it's not turned off, this loop animation is going to play. Now, interestingly, our loop animation is only going to play once because it's just generally set to do that. So we're going to go down to our loop. I'm going to left click on it down here. Okay, make sure you left click on it down in the inspector, also in the project view down here. Sorry. And once you do that, it's going to open up this window up here. Okay. It's going to set it up in the inspector, and you're going to see that it has a little button that says loop time. Okay, we're going to tick that. Okay, we're going to make sure that that's ticked, and that just says, hey, look, you're going to play this loop, and when you finish playing it, you're going to keep playing it. It's not just going to play once and end, which in this case is great because we're just going to build a very, very simple loop animation. Cool. So let's go back to the scene. Well, we haven't got anything here at the moment. So I'm going to chuck some stuff in. I'm going to add a 3D object plane. Okay, I'm just going to zero it out. I'm going to have it in the middle of the scene. I'm going to go to my camera, and I'm going to see it's over here. You know, I can see in the game view it's not really seeing much. I'm just going to drag it up a bit, pull it forward, or just drag down a bit. Just because I want to make sure that I can see quite clearly what's happening. Cool. And finally, I'm going to go create empty, and I'm just going to call this VFX. I'm going to zero it out. It's going to be in the middle of the scene. And then I'm going to add component animator. Okay? Now I'm doing this because this object here is going to have our animator on it, and it's going to have all the objects underneath it that have the animation keyframes and such on them, and being affected by the animator. Okay? So once you attach the animator, you want to make sure to drag in VFX into this controller. Okay? You can also do it by clicking on the little dot, and you'll see in your assets you have VFX. Okay? Now obviously you could also do this as well by dragging VFX onto it here, and that would set it up for you as well. Okay. Anyone lost so far here? So I zeroed out the plane. I made a new empty game object, okay? So right click, create empty. I then zeroed it out by just going to the positioning thing again, and then I dragged that VFX animator onto it, okay? Make sure not to drag the loop. Don't drag the loop on. Just drag. If you drag the loop on, you'll get this weird thing and you'll make a new animator. We just want to drag on the VFX, okay? Now, one thing to note about the icons for the light or camera, make sure you have this ticked. Okay, just press on the gizmos and it will toggle them on. Also as well, small note for those of you who didn't have your materials or shaders animating the scene, make sure you have this little button ticked here, okay? Just press on it, it should be highlighted light gray like that, or I think maybe white in non-pro, I'm not sure. You can also double check as well, because the animated materials part should have a little tick next to it. Yeah, that was the, I think this should be in the problem, Stuart. Cool. So, we've got this little thing. Now, let's have a brief on how exactly animators work in Unity. So, animators are, yep, that's the one, G. So, animators are hierarchical bound. So, what do I mean by that? I mean that what it does is it accesses objects underneath itself in a parental arrangement. So it says, hey, I have a child that's under this object and under this object called this, and I'm going to change its position. Now, that has a couple of benefits and quite a lot of downsides. So let's talk through those both very quickly. First upside is that it's very reusable and repurposable. So for instance, let's say I make an animator for a door. Well, that's great. You can make a door and have a door object underneath the like empty game object or whatever that's holding the door, and you can say, hey, animate the door child, and that door could look like anything. It could be a broken door, it could be a moldy door, it could be an office door. So long as the motion's the same, it's going to animate in the same way, and that's perfect, right? We could have like a door with no door handle. It doesn't really care what other objects are underneath it and stuff. As long as the name's the same, it's good. And you can kind of extrapolate that out a bit further. Like, for instance, let's say we make an animator to bob a ship up and down. Or let's say bob an orb up and down, right? Like a little magical, floaty demon orb. It's going to bob up and down. It's, ooh, spooky. Well, we later might find out, oh man, it'd be really cool if we could make the demon's heads do the same at the end of the game. You know, we want to have all their heads bobbing up and down around the player, right? Don't know why you want to do this, but let's say you want to do this. Well, if the demon head has the same naming structure and hierarchy structure, so you imagine you've got, just for sanity's sake, let's call this demon orb, right? And we've got, let's say, an object here called mesh, and then we have another one which is a demon head, right? So long as these things are called the same, these things can be called different, that's fine. These things are called the same. Let's say underneath this there's a light you know, there's a light that flies around the thing, and underneath this one there's a light. That is totally a-okay. And it doesn't even matter if those lights are different types. One of those lights could be a spotlight, one of those lights could be a point light, one of those could be a thorn, right? It doesn't matter, just so long as the names are the same. The animation will bind to both of them the same way, which is really, really great. Now, there are some pretty obvious downsides though. Firstly, if I want Demon Orb to affect VFX, it will not do that. Okay? Can't do that. This VFX animator, right? It can access itself and its children. It cannot access Demon Orb. It cannot access Plane. If I have VFX here, it can't access the mesh. It can't access the Demon Orb. It can only access itself and further down this parental nesting. Okay? Also, thanks Aaron for helping out. Really appreciate that. So that has an obvious pretty big downside in that animators are encapsulated, okay? So they only affect themselves. The upside, there is a little bit of an upside to that in that we're kind of confident with an animator and that I know that VFX isn't doing anything whack to the rest of the scene. I know that it can't affect any of these objects. I can look at the animator and the objects underneath it, and that's all that that animator is ever going to affect. Classically, at least. There's some ways we can get around that, but we'll talk about those later. Finally, as well, it's important to note that sometimes those naming conventions will screw you, okay? So really quickly, I'm just going to go ahead. I'm just going to... Actually, we'll demonstrate it in a bit. We'll make an animation first, and then we'll demonstrate this issue. We'll talk about how to solve it, and we'll agree not to solve it in general, okay? Because it will cause you pain. And this is part of the reason why there's naming conventions as part of the brief. Because if you don't have good naming conventions, you will rue the day that you don't. I know for my project that I built that exemplar, I did not do a good job of that. And that caused me a lot of pain when working on those components later, okay? So I want to try and spare you guys that pain. Cool. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to go to our VFX, little empty object with the animator. We're going to right click on it. And we're going to go 3D object, cube. Okay? So we're going to build the most simple animation possible, and from there we'll start ramping it up and getting more exciting. Hopefully this will all be a piece of cake for you guys. If you guys are getting stuck or having trouble, please do tell me I'm going too fast, or we'll go back and go over the stuff that you guys are having issue with, okay? Cool. So let's go ahead. And this won't be open for you guys. You're going to go right click down here, and you're going to go add tab, and you're going to go animation, okay? So make sure you right click on this little project tab, and you're going to add the animation tab, okay? We need this because this is how we're going to animate our object. Now when you do that, you should immediately see that if you have the visual effects object selected, okay, if you have something else selected, it's all going to be grayed out like this. And you're going to get stuff like to begin animating plane, create an animator. But if you have VFX selected, it's going to realize it's got an animator on it, and it's going to load that for you, okay? So you should see over here that the animation clip that we built, called loop and dragged into the animator, is immediately filled down here. Now we can click on this little drop down arrow to change, to open up a little menu to change what clips we're going to edit. Because we've only got one clip, we don't need to do that. We're not going to worry too much about this add property button. The main things we're going to be dealing with is this preview button here, this record button here, the scrubber, and some stuff that's going to pop up down here for us, okay? As well as little keyframes that are going to pop down here. This is going to be very familiar to those of you who've done animation before, who have worked in just general keyframing. It's pretty common practice, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, once this is all set up, I'm going to hit the record button. Everything's going to go red. I'm going to left click on the cube, okay? I'm going to drag my scrubber out to let's say 0.20. And I'm going to move it up, okay? Now you can see that when we did this, it added 2 keyframes. It added a keyframe at the beginning, which is where the cube was when it was all initialized and we hadn't added anything. And then it added the keyframe at the scrubber, okay? So when you have that record in red and this bar is red and stuff, what will happen is when you move things or change values that the animator can understand and accept and write to its animation, it will build keyframes for you automatically. So we know that it's built a keyframe obviously because we've got this little keyframe here, but we also know it's animated at this point because over here you can see very faintly that these boxes are dark red background, okay? That means that we have keyframes for these values. Okay? So all I did to set the key was I just dragged it. And you can see that when we drag this keyframe, if I open up this little drop down, this keyframe is changing, okay? And if I move it over the left as well, that Z keyframe is changing. Move it to the left and right, that X keyframe is changing, okay? Now we could also go down here and type in a number, like 4. We could also go in over up to the transform position up here and type in a value like, let's say 3. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to set our first keyframe, let's say like height 1, so we're off the ground. And our second keyframe is going to be at, I don't know, 1.5. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select my first keyframes, okay, so just drag over them, hit Control C, and I'm going to drag my scrubber all the way up to 040, so double the length, and I'm just going to hit paste, okay? Or alternatively, you could just delete these and type in a new value here, or move the value back down, or type in a value here, okay? So you can set keys from a variety of spaces. You can set them from the inspector, you can set them from the animation dope sheet, you can set them from gizmos by moving them in here or changing them in here, and you can also as well go to curves, and we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so once you've done that, you should have an animation that looks like this. If I play it, it's going to do that. It's going to bob up and down. Okay. Oh, has everyone got that working so far? Has anyone stuck at some point with this animation? Okay, where are you guys stuck? Because we'll move a bit faster further down the line once we're building some stuff that's a little bit really just build on the basics. Because once you understand how to set keyframes and how to move values and how to move keyframes around, you've pretty much mastered the animator. And from there, it's just a matter of applying it to different contexts, right? So rather than changing the height, you change the rotation or the scale or a material value or a script value. It's all very one after the other. Yep, so make sure that red button is pressed. And that will definitely highlight things in red. And make sure you move the scrubber as well. So make sure you drag the scrubber back and forth to change where those keyframes are. Because if you keep it back here and you change the values, you're only ever going to change that first keyframe value. You're never going to be changing any of the others. Okay, I'm gonna have a poll. Okay. Vote now. Because we'll be doing this over and over again, but we'll be doing it over and over again faster. So I want to make sure that you guys are 100% onto this, because if you're not, when we start accelerating, you guys are going to drop. Cool beans. Okay, let's move forward then. So we've got this looping back and forth, that's great. Let's go ahead and let's have a look at our curves. So you just click down here, change it from dope sheet to curves. So dope sheet just gives you your keyframes. It's quite useful because it's all just laid out as keyframes and you can read the values here. Curves, it then reads those values out as actual curves and shows you the interpolation between those values, as well as showing you those values in space, right? So you can kind of see that when we open this up, this isn't very useful. So really important shortcut here, okay? We're going to select some curves. In this case, we're going to select them all. And we could also do that through Control A, or I could just left click drag. So Control A to select all, or left click and drag. So Control A, and then we're going to press F, okay? How do you select curves? Absolute bottom part, there's two little words, dope sheet and curves. Click the curves one, okay? Now, when you press F in Unity, in general, it will try to focus your camera on whatever you've selected. So for instance, if I press F on this, it's going to try and put the whole plane into the focal view. I press F on the camera, it does the same there. F on the directional light, same there. F on the cube, it zooms in a bit, right? Because the cube has volume, and we know that the plane is bigger than the cube. So don't be afraid of using this to get around your scene. It's quite useful, and sometimes when you're working with Canvas UI or something like that, just press F when you select an object that's part of your scene that's quite small. Cool. So again, we went to curves. We selected the curves. You know, imagine you zoomed in all the way here, right? This isn't very useful. So select the curves you want to look at and hit F to focus them, okay? Now once we do this, we can see that our curve is flat in both ways, okay? Which is really good. We can even see beyond the end of our animation. So this little light bit here, right, is where our animation ends, and this dark bit is, you know, end of the animation. So because our clip loops, we know it loops and plays over again, but some clips might not loop. So this is kind of, you know, unknown territory. But Unity does us a favor and says, look, I'm going to presume that you're going to loop the clip. So here's what it would look like if you looped it. It's going to play this over and over again. And you can see quite clearly that these little breakpoints, right, where we're going from the end of the animation to the beginning of the animation are clean, which is great. Because, you know, what happens if we drag this up just like this? Well, you see suddenly that there's this very harsh, abrupt jump here. And if we play this, you can see it's not going to work properly, okay? Finally, as well, just one more thing about the curves before we start working with handles and stuff. We can right click on this and hit edit key, and we can change the values here as well, okay? So you can edit the timestamps as well as the values by right clicking and hitting edit key. And even if you want to select two of them, you can edit both of them at the same time. Just keep in mind that if you change the values for them, then they become the same. You can edit the values and set them to be the same thing without adjusting the timestamp, which is really nice, or vice versa. Cool. Okie dokie. So let's try something a bit novel, right? So we've got this nice, you know, smooth curve, but let's say we want it to be a little bit more jumpy at the top. Let's go ahead. We're going to right click on this, and we're going to see that there's a variety of options. There's clamped auto, auto, free smooth, flat, broken. Very briefly, clamped auto and auto are by and by pretty much the same. Clamped auto is just a little bit safer. Auto essentially just says, hey, I will adjust the handle to be automatically determined by the curve. Yeah, Dave is 100% correct. It's exactly the same concepts. Like, this is hopefully not too much of a shock to your guys' systems. Free smooth is, I believe you can just like smoothly adjust both parts, which is great. Flat just puts it flat, which is great for things like this. We want to have a small, a nice ease in, ease out. And finally we have broken, okay? Broken means I can adjust this handle and this handle. So I can make it do stuff like this. Okay? Finally, you also have adjustment for left, right, and both tangents together. So you can set both tangents to linear, which will put you on a handle that draws straight down towards the target. You can put them on constant. We'll see what that does. That makes this a straight line and then breaks down. So essentially what that does, it says, hey, don't have a curve. Stay at this value, and then the next keyframe, snap immediately, which is really great for things that you want to have immediate behavior on. And you can also obviously do weighted as well, which, yeah, just essentially allows you to have a handle with extra weight so you can drag it out and get really cool, nice behavior like this. So, cool. That is a very, very quick overview, okay? And again, you can obviously untick broken, we'll set it back to, say, free smooth, and now you can adjust this and this together. So keep in mind, sometimes it's worth having both of them just be weighted, and then you can drag them out both like this and have really nice, cool, interesting curves. Cool. So now we've very briefly gone over this. Let's go ahead and talk about something more complex, okay? So, actually, before we get into more shader work, I will have a brief tangent onto animations again, animators, and why you gotta be a bit careful, okay? So let's say I'm me, you know, I'm working on this great animation, great visual effect, and I get to this point, I'm like, you know, dang, cube's a really cruddy name, right? I just dropped this 3D object into the scene. It's really interior explosion, okay? My great name. Now, when I think about it, it's not going to be cube position down here, it's going to be interior explosion. So I hit enter, and look at that. We have a problem. So you see down here, it says cube position missing. What this means is, it says, hey look, I thought I had a child object called cube, and it's gone. I don't know where it's gone. I don't know what's happened to it. I don't know how to find it, and I can't animate it. Now the problem is we obviously know that object we just renamed was called cube, but Unity doesn't know that. So you play this animation now, right? Nothing, okay? Nothing at all. So please, please, please keep this in mind. If you rename something like this, it will not adjust your animator to adapt to that. So do make sure that you rename your objects when you work on them, because otherwise you have what I have in my scene, where I have 3 point lights. They're all called point light. I have no idea at a glance which one each is it, right? And on top of that as well, I exported my stuff out from Blender as object groups rather than, or maybe not as object groups, sorry. So all my meshes are called default because I just worked on like a default plane. So what does that mean? Well, it means all of my material edits are on defaults. And of course, naturally being me, an idiot, I called my material properties things like pulse and reveal, and I use the same name over multiple shaders. So what does that mean? That means I have in my animator about 25 properties that are all attached to a default mesh called, you know, and they change the shader value like pulse or something like that, or reveal. And at a glance, I have no idea which is which, right? So please, please, please make sure you don't do that. Now there is a way to relink the animation to a rename mesh. That is possible, okay? It's not enjoyable by any means. I think at some point I built a tool to fix it. I will have a wee look for you guys and see if I can find that, because yeah, it's painful. Let me just really quickly show you how we can do that though, just in case this happens, because sometimes you do need to rename things. I understand that that is unfortunately sometimes the nature of things. Now keep in mind as well that the way we would have to redo this is we would actually have to, unfortunately, this is very painful. If you see here, right, all the keyframes are gone. So if we rename this back to cube, it still keeps all the keyframes, right? So what we'd actually have to do, and this is damn frustrating, is we'd have to duplicate it, call this one whatever we want, then proceed to go ahead and add keyframes, right? Like this. And then go ahead, delete cube, and delete that there, okay? Because otherwise, you won't be able to see it. And you can see, I think in this case I managed to do it rel, which is fine. But actually in general, the easier way is actually editing it through the code. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna pull it up. I'm gonna show you how to relink those animations, okay? And I'll try and do put thought into your names, and do put thoughts into your parent names as well, okay? So for context, if I put an object here called, let's say, interior, because you know obviously it's an interior explosion, the interior explosion goes underneath the interior, I drag it in, it's broken again, okay? Because the parental constraints have changed again. It's gone from interior explosion to interior. Now I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to fix it during by editing some code. It's not really editing code, maybe it isn't really the right word. It's more just tedious search and replace, okay? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go to your project view. You can just do it by right clicking down here, go show on Explorer. We're gonna enter here, and you're going to see that there's this thing called loop.anim, okay? You're going to right click this. We're going to have to open with, I'm going to open with Visual Studio Code. That's going to open it up here. And here is your YAML file for your animation, okay? Now these get very, very long. If I have a very quick look, let me see if I can pull up my other one. Not that. These get insane. So do try and be sane with this, because you will rue the day. This is the one that I built for the exemplar. Okay. It's very long. Okay. It's very long. Okay. So yeah, 30,000 lines long. It's a bit tedious. So what you're gonna do now, obviously in a small one like this, you could go ahead and just manually change it, but I would recommend changing it via Control F. So what you want to do is you want to have a look for, now where is it? Now we know that our object, if we look at our animation, was called the interior explosion, right? So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna look for interior. Ooh. Oh, hold up. Oh, wait, hold up a second. We might have to do it like this. 1 second. Is that gonna work? Hold up. So when you want to open it in Visual Studio, you need to right click on the .anim file and go open with and choose Visual Studio Code. Here we go. Yeah. Okay. So you also need to make sure as well that you change it while it's still white. You can't change it when it's yellow. I think they color it to make the file more efficient. Now, you can see that when we do that, we have a very convenient, if we go down here, actually, we can just do this by searching, so let's just go ahead and do that. We know that the object is called interior explosion, and you can see here that we have this text saying path is interior explosion. So what that's doing is it's saying, hey, we have this object, its path is interior explosion. Okay, you can see this is a couple of times. Let's use path here, path here, path here, okay? So what we're gonna do in this case is, generally speaking, you wanna say, you wanna do this, you wanna make sure that you're replacing the whole thing, so path interior explosion. You're gonna copy that, and we're gonna call this, say, cube, okay? And we're just gonna go replace all. We'll hit save, we'll minimize it, and now see this is called cube in position, okay? And if I change this to be called cube, you see now it reattaches and our animation works back, okay? So you can fix it like that, but again, it's very tedious. There's a slim risk that you really fuck something up. I will have a wee look through some old code repositories and stuff and see if I have that script that does it for you. It's quite useful. Essentially, you just give it an animator, you give it a value name and the object, and it just renames it for you and rebinds everything, so that way you don't have to edit the file manually, because it is very frustrating to do that, obviously. Okay? Cool beans. So, let's go ahead and let's go open up Shader Graph, because we're going to build something a little bit more exciting to work with. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to make a new, actually, hold up. What graphs do we want to work on today? Because we have 3 hours, and we're going to try and animate them. We're going to make something like, vaguely interesting, not too painful, hopefully. What graphs do we want to work with today? Because this week we're going to cover animators. We're going to do a little bit more work with some shaders, and then next week we'll cover some very basic scripting, just stuff like exiting game, just stuff like moving a camera around, playing an animation, and maybe if you want to get fancy, you can start extending that into doing some rigid body assessment or shake and stuff like that. The spinning aspect from the Heart Seeker, okay. You want to do a nice scene setup. What do you mean by nice scene setup, G? Every scene's a nice scene setup if you look at it the right way. Okay, so got the spinning aspect from the Heart Seeker. So do you mean the mesh spinning around? Because there's a couple of ways of skinning that. Ground crack explosion, I like that. That's good. I think we covered it a little bit last week, but we'll do maybe a better version this week. Actually, maybe we'll do A smoke effect. Okay. 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 I think we're gonna cover a lot of the camera control stuff next week because I think that's a lot of that's like high level polish and stuff. I don't want you guys to get too attached to. I mean, like obviously, like I put quite a bit of effort into that because that's something that I'm good at. So it's easier for me. I don't expect the level of fidelity that I put in. Like I don't expect it to be. I'm happy with it snapping to the next camera position. That's fine. I'm happy for the rigid bodies to. I mean, if you manage to get rigid bodies moving out with the explosion, that's really really awesome. Okay, so let's make a poll for this. Okay, so spinning trail. Because maybe we'll try and integrate all these pieces together so we build some sort of cool visual effect today. Ground, crack, explosion, smoke effect. Underwater distortion. Lordy baby, that's gonna be a... We can maybe do some distortion. Underwater distortion. What do you mean by underwater distortion, Dion? Because there's a couple of, I guess, complex parts to that. Okay, I'm gonna try and break up some of these as well. Hopefully there's enough colors in our cruddy Discord rainbow for this. Okay, and we'll do shockwave. Okay. Okay, maybe we'll do... Oh, like a fluid movement. Do you mean like, let me see if I can find it. Because, in general, I really recommend, like, this had some really cool stuff. I'll post this in 2 seconds. Okay. Blurring. Okay. Okay. If we have enough colors for this, I will accept it. I'm wondering if we do have enough colors though. White square button. Ew. I ain't about that life. Okay. Man, we got one more. Okay. Blur. Shockwave. Okay, and then I think I've got space for one more. Let's call fluid movement. Oh, David's typing. I'm looking for. I wanna hear what he wants. Flying unicorn. Oh, rainbow effect. Okay, let's add. Let's add a rainbow effect. Okay. Cool. We could do some chromatic aberration. I'm gonna change it to say rainbow / chromatic aberration. I think that's spelled correctly. Spell check. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah, sorry, my keyboard's very clacky. Okay. Okay, so explosion. Okay. So let's like let's structure this a bit. Let's have our little box, okay? And our box is gonna land on the ground, and we're gonna make it like have a dope explosion come out from it. Yeah, sound good? How does that sound? Cool? Okay. Sweet. So okay. So here's what I'm thinking. We're going to I like that explosion. That's cool. Dang. I can guess as to how they did it. That's really nice. That looks sick. Mean. Cool. So let's break this down, okay? So a box falls down, and this is a really important structural thing to think about when you're building these types of effects. Make sure to take your effect and break it down semantically before you start building it, because if you don't, you're gonna have a massive problem. You're gonna get to, I don't know, you're gonna get like 2 seconds in, and you're already gonna be lost. You're just gonna be like, well, what am I building? What am I doing here? You're gonna be questioning a lot about your life if you're just building effects. So let happy accidents happen, you know. Try something, if it builds some kind of cool thing, see if you can integrate it, but also try and have some sort of artistic vision from the beginning that you really understand where your project's gonna go. Think, okay, I'm going to have a box falling down, and it's gonna hit the ground, and it's gonna do this or do that, okay? So we're gonna go, box falls down, box maybe gets caught in ground. Maybe we'll even go as far to say that it's like a sword box, okay? So we're gonna make it a little sword, okay? Okay. I'm not gonna make a sword model, but I'm gonna use a box and we're gonna make it. Maybe we'll build a little model, a little sword out of cubes. If you genuinely, so far, Miles, if you take the GAT270 template project that I dropped further up, all we have done so far is add an animator, add an object, and add an animation. It should take about 5 minutes. Yep. So we're gonna get the sword box gets caught on the ground. Okay, so we're gonna like kind of lodge it in the ground a little bit. We're gonna have explosion. We're gonna have a little shockwave, like ripple. We're gonna have maybe a crack. We'll see how we go for time on that. And how about we do, okay, so what we had explosion as high up, we had rainbow chromatic aberration as high up, thank you David. We had a spinning trail as pretty high up, so maybe we'll do a spinning trail when it falls down. That sounds kind of cool. I think that would be quite dope. We have a ground crack, okay, it's kind of well voted for. We have a shockwave, cool. I don't know if we'll be able to get fluid movement, but maybe we could and fluid movement. I think we'll tackle camera shake at the end. Yeah, I mean, this is the funny thing, right? Like, you know, there's so many of these effects, it's just really layering of small elements together. There's nothing really that complex with that Varus effect. There's nothing really that complex with even my effect. Honestly, the most complex parts of my effect, I actually don't like the most. The ones that are simple are the ones that work the best. And okay, maybe no one wanted blur, unfortunately. And okay, I think that's everything. Yeah, and maybe we'll do some crack, maybe some chromatic aberration to get fancy. Okay, cool. Yeah. I'm not even surprised with you, David. I knew when you said rainbow unicorn that something wild was gonna happen. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's make an empty game object under our VFX, and we're gonna call this let's call this sword. Call it whatever you want. I'm gonna make a sword, but you're welcome to obviously do something else. So I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna delete the cube. Yeah, I'm gonna make an empty game object. And reason why I want an empty game object here is because I want to layer all my parts underneath it, and that way, if I later decide I want to scale up the whole sword, or I want to rotate the whole sword, I'm not rotating and moving 5 different components. I'm just moving one. Okay, so we're gonna make a sword out of boxes, right? Really stylized. And I'm gonna now my center of the VFX is at the center of this plane, and the center of the sword is at the center of the plane, or the pivot of the sword, sorry, is at the center of this plane as well. And I'm gonna keep that in mind when I'm working here. And so essentially, I'm gonna pivot my sword around the tip of it. Let's say. I think that's probably sane for now. So we're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna go 3D object cube, gonna drag this up a bit. Maybe I'll give it a bit of lenience so it kind of just pierces if the tip is there. Scale it in. Nope. Scale it in. This could be like a big, bulky sword. Maybe it's more like a cross by the end of it. That's gonna be a bit bad, I guess. Let's drag this up. Let's make this a bit wider for our hilt. I'm sure Matt is cringing at our painful 3D modeling skills right now. Let's go ahead and let's make this like 0.1, and let's scale it up. Get that little, oh, that's actually, I like the fact that it comes back through there. That's a little happy accident. I'm okay with that. Maybe we'll make it a little bit bigger so it's a bit more pokey-outy. I know there's a technical term for this. It's not the pokey-outy bit, but we won't tell anyone that, okay? See what happens. Does it look cool with like rotated? Does that look cool? That looks kind of cool. I kind of like that. That's kind of nice. Cool, let's roll with it. Let's go ahead and I'll just add a cube up here. So 0.2, 0.2, 0.2 or something like that. Cool. So there's our sword, okay? Looks a bit dinky with the fact that it doesn't really have an end to it. Maybe we'll fix that really quickly. I'll go ahead and I'll add a little triangle or something, a little like half bit at the end. We'll go 0.3 maybe, 0.3. Nope. 0.3, 0.3. Okay, cool. I'll just put it like that. I mean, that looks a bit weird, but you know what? It's a sword. I'm buying it. You're buying it. Maybe not too much, but close enough. Okay, we'll just dink it back into the ground. I'll try and make sure it's like, I'm gonna drag all of them, and while this is all nicely laid out, I'm just gonna drag them up a bit so kind of just in the ground. So cool. There's our sword. Great. Now, let's just like close that for a second, and let's set up our animator. Okay. So previously, we set up an animator with just a single loop that played. And the great thing about that is that it just, keeps playing this loop over and over again. Now that's fine if you want to do that, but we don't. We want to have an animator that has two states. We're going to have an idle, so nothing's happening, and we're going to have a fire or play effect, okay? So I'm going to go down here, I'm going to go create animation. I'm going to call this idle. Go down here, go create animation. We're going to call this play. I'm going to drag both of these in. Okay. Now, you can kind of tell from this diagram that at the moment, there's no way of getting to idle, no way of getting to play. Okay. We're going to change that. I'm going to right click on idle, and I'm going to go set as layer default state. I'm going to delete the loop. We don't need that anymore. And I'm going to right click on the idle, I'm going to make transition, and I'm going to left click on the play. I'm going to right click on the play, I'm going to make transition, and left click on the idle, okay? And you'll get these two little Y arrows. And that means that idle is connected to play.
Can you go through the process again?
Yep, real quick. I'll show you one more time. So we grabbed the two animations we just made, dragged them in. Now, before actually, obviously this was set as our layer default state like this, right? Now, to make this one go orange and be our default state, we right click on it and hit set as layer default state. This means that the animator will enter this one by default, okay? Once you do that, it's gonna be orange. We can just delete this loop. We don't need it anymore. Then what we did is we set up our transitions, okay? Because we want to be able to go from our idle to our play, and our play to our idle, okay? So we're gonna right click on this, make transition, play. Right click on this, make transition, idle. And you'll get these two little Y arrows. Now we're gonna go ahead and really quickly change these. Now the way that we're gonna structure our animator is gonna be quite simple. Idle, okay, is gonna be a state, okay? It's really just gonna have a single keyframe the whole way down. It's gonna be no length at all. It's just gonna be a freeze frame in time, okay? So we want idle to exit to play the moment we're ready, okay? So we're going to go ahead, we're going to go over here, we're going to untick has exit time, and we're going to set transition duration to 0, okay? So we don't want to wait. And in fact, I'm going to actually turn exit time to 0, just so down here this diagram is correct, okay? Cool. Now vice versa, we only want to exit play once we're
Sorry, can
fully...
you show that again?
Yep, so we left click on the transition. Over here on the right hand side, there's this little like thing above this little graph. You want to left click on the settings. You want to make sure that has exit time is unticked. So exit time says, hey, you have to wait till it's time to exit the animation. We want to set exit time to 0. It doesn't really matter too much, just make sure that the graph down here looks correct. And then finally as well, we want to make sure transition duration is set to 0. So we don't want to blend between these two states. We just want to, you imagine what's going to happen is our idle is going to be a freeze frame of everything outside of play. And then our play animation, or our fire animation, or our shoot animation, or our visual effect is going to take us from that freeze frame of nothing happening to everything happening at once, the bullet firing, the character winding up, the explosion at the end, and then it's going to clean itself up, okay? It's going to unwrap all those conditions. It's going to, remove the wind-up particles. It's going to remove the cracks in the wall. It's going to do everything like that. And at the end of it, we're just going to be able to step immediately back into the idle. Okay, so this transition we're looking at is the idle to play. So because we want the idle to go immediately to the play and just start that animation, we don't want to have an exit time, we don't want to wait for any length of time, and we don't want to have a transition duration either. We don't want to blend between these two states. We just want to play the play. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to our play to idle transition, so the other way around. And we're going to have it a bit different. We're going to have the exit time set to 1 and the transition duration set to 0. Okay, so exit time is ticked. The exit time is 1 because that means the whole animation, so it's normalized, it's 0 to 1. And our transition duration is 0. So you imagine, you see down on this graph here, it's perfectly laid out, right? We're going to play all of this animation and then we're going to go straight to idle. There's going to be no blending. There's going to be no jumping out of this early into idle. We'd have to play the whole thing. If you don't have has exit time ticked, this is grayed out. You have to tick the has exit time, change it to 0, and just untick it. If has exit time is unticked, you're fine. I just get a bit pedantic because I know that if this is set to 0.5 and this is unticked, this looks wrong. This is confusing to my eye because I'm like, this is not the transition I want. So I just make sure that this is always set to 0 before I untick the has exit time. Cool. Okay. Finally, we're going to do one last thing. We're going to set up a parameter to move between the two because we don't want to just randomly interplay, right? We only want to interplay when we're ready. So we're going to go up to the top, and up here you have two little menus. You have layers and parameters. You want to go to parameters, okay? And we're going to click on it, and we're going to go add, and we're going to hit trigger, okay? So left click on parameters, left click on this, select trigger, and then, call it whatever you want. Now a trigger is a boolean, right? So it's either true or false. But the great thing about triggers is they get consumed when they get used. So what that means is if we use this as a condition for a transition in our state machine, it's going to get eaten up. So it's going to get set to true, it's going to be a condition, and then by transitioning through that transition that requires it, it's going to be set back to false. Okay? So once we do that, once we've got this little thing, you gotta see this little like, what's it called, radio button. Now, obviously the white in the middle means it's on, otherwise it means off. We're gonna go back to our idle to play transition, okay? We're gonna go down to conditions, and we're gonna hit plus. And it's automatically gonna fill out that our condition is that play. Okay? Now I'm gonna drag this off to the side, and I'm just really quickly gonna show you, no worries. I'm going to really quickly show you what happens. So the great thing about Unity is, if I don't have the set maximize on play, if I just let this be as it is, you can see the idle is played. And we're going to hit this tick, and it's going to jump to play, and then it's going to jump back. And you see the moment we click this, that play gets eaten up, right? It transitions to play and then moves back. So again, left click on this white transition from idle to play, go down to conditions, make sure you hit the plus to add the play condition, okay? And then when you're in play mode, just hit the little radio on this one, okay? This thing here. Cool beans. So that is our animator actually set up now. That's pretty much how my animator works. I actually don't think I have anything different in my animator. Everything else is just animation from there. Okay. So well, let's get to it, right? First things first, I'm gonna set the camera up just to be a bit better viewing facing, just because at the moment our viewport is kind of a bit ratchet. It's a bit hard to really see our scene properly. Again, you don't have to do this by any means. I just want to have like a nice view of our scene while we're editing it. Okay. So we have this little game. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drop the 3 pieces into the chat, and I believe if you download them all and drag them into your project together, that might work. Give it a shot if you're really, really stuck. Again, this wasn't that simple complex for controller, but hopefully if you guys are really stuck, that could help out, okay? At the end of the class, I'll probably zip up this week folder and just give it back to you guys, so you guys have that as a reference point. And I'm also recording as well in the background. I think I haven't messed it up this time, so if you guys hopefully want to go through that as well, you have that. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go to our animation, okay? I'm going to go to play, so I'm going to left click on this little drop down over here. I'm going to select the play animation clip, because I don't want to animate the idle, I want to animation the play, okay? And I'm just going to start setting up some keyframes, okay? So, you know, my one, I'm gonna make the sword start all the way over here. And I'm gonna I'll chuck into the ground over here, let's say. Let's see how this goes. I'll maybe make it like this and like this or something like that, so it kind of turns as it flies. It's like, cool. So your idle to your, that seems fine. Shauna, that seems fine. And we have a look at your other one. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you're good. Do you have it selected in the, if you split the, so if you just drag this tab so that it's over here. Yep, we just did one thing, Stuart. If you see on Shauna's first transition from idle to play, she has as her conditions play. So what we have to do is just hit the little plus button next to that conditions little tab on the inspector, and you're good. That should be working, Shauna. Just make sure you you're in like actual play mode, so you've actually hit play and the game is in session, and then tick the thing. So, you know, obviously if I go here, I hit play. Okay. Is it moving between the two animation states, or is it just stuck in one of them? Not at all. Have you got the VFX selected? Just stuck on? Hold up, let me have a look again. One. Yeah. That seems fine. Have you made sure that your VFX object has the animator on it? That definitely looks correct. If you're having issues, I would just recommend dragging in the controller and the idle and play. Your thing seems totally fine. Oh, so keep in mind that when you hit this play, let me just delete my keyframe real quick, okay? if I hit play, all we're gonna get is this happening here. Okay, so this blue line is filled, which means idle is finished playing. I hit the tick, and then play starts playing. Okay, and it's immediately gonna go back after a bit. Sometimes, if you're in 2018, it might actually never jump to play. It might happen so fast that it's not visible. 2019 changed some rule sets about how they showed this progress bar. Actually, yeah, so if you're not having anything, let's go ahead and add some keyframes so that you guys can see that animation, okay? So go ahead, grab your sword, hit the record button, make sure you're editing the play animation clip, okay? And go ahead, drag the sword into whatever start position you want. In my case, I'm gonna have him floating in the sky and a bit rotated. And instead of an in keyframe, so it's actually doing something, right? We'll send him to there. Maybe we'll lodge him more into the ground a bit. I'm just gonna spin him the other way. Okay, so make sure you got 2 keyframes. And unhit the record button, just hit play. And now try hitting that trigger, okay? Because now there's keyframe data for your editor to obviously use, and it has to play that play clip fully. Now, I don't want to spend too much time focusing on the strict keyframing of things, because at the end of the day, you guys can spend a lot more time tweaking and tuning curves. For instance, I would personally recommend, if I were in your shoes, that you do not use an ease out, or an ease in, sorry, for flying into the ground. That's not how a sword flies into the ground, right? Still no blue bars? The blue bars don't cycle. Are you playing the animation that you built? When you hit that trigger, does it, if I hit play, if I hit this, does it play the clip once and then go back to wherever the sword was in the beginning? If so, you're good. It's playing but not doing any of that. Have you... The trigger doesn't reset. Did you make sure that it is a trigger and not a ball? A ball will look like this. It'll have a little square box. This is a circle box. Make sure that your transition has the condition. If your trigger is staying on, let me just do this idle to play. Trigger and not a ball. A ball will look like this. It'll have a little square box. This is a circle box. Yeah, if it's playing, yeah, it will be good. Yeah, if you're having errors, Shauna, yeah, you won't be into play mode and stuff. That's weird. Yeah, we'll have a break soon, and we'll talk more about this. Yeah, I mean, 2018 should be fine with it. I would recommend that over the break you download the project I dropped further up, the GAT270 template project, and open it in 2019.3.7 F1, because we're going to use the shader graph very soon, and you need to be in 2019 for that to play nice. Otherwise, you're going to have issues. Okay. So, what we'll do is we're hitting 3 now. How about we take a wee break? If I were you guys, I would have a look at playing maybe around with the curves and stuff, making this little first bit nice and juicy. I mean, it's very simple to do. Again, I'm just selecting these and just changing their curves so that it's a little bit harsher. So now you see when it plays, we really jump into the wall. And you can see because it's looping, again, you might want to grab these, drag them all the way out here, just so you can see it. Oh, it's really bad. Make sure though as well, if you obviously change one side of the tangent, you change the other to maybe something like constant or maybe even linear. Constant in this case would be fine though, just because we just want to be able to see this effect without it looping immediately back to the start. You can see that has a lot more punch than just easing in. Yeah, so your sword might disappear when it goes back to idle. You've got to keep in mind when you look at your idle, this is like 2 modes that are really important to think about when animators, or arguably 3. The first mode is off, right? Nothing is animating, nothing's previewing, there's nothing kind of loaded. So you'll know that's the case because neither of these things are ticked. This is just a regular gray color, and obviously your objects are pretty much wherever they should be in the scene. The second one to think about is your recording. So you have this little red button, this goes bright red, this bit goes red. Over on your inspector over up there, if you have properties changing, those go red. But the other one to think about is preview. Now preview is blue, okay? It's this nice cool blue. And what it means, and you actually get it blue over in the inspector as well. So for instance, if I have a look here, if I select the sword, for instance, you can see over here that these things are blue, okay? Because these parts are being rotated and moved. And what preview is it's great because it allows you to see the animation, but you're not recording. So if I change these values, if I say, oh, actually, what does this look like? It hasn't changed the keyframes, it hasn't changed anything. If I change the scrubber and move it back, it will reset and it will reapply the animation values to the object, okay? So it's a really good way of just like checking things out and not being worried that if you change any values, it's gonna save, okay? So you can see that with this, our sword goes like that, okay? Okie dokie. Let's go ahead and let's have a half-an-hour break. We'll come back at 3:35, let's say. I'm gonna go grab a coffee and just double check that there's not anything I have to do about knife attack. And if you guys have any issues or anything not working, obviously keep in mind we've just kind of built this animation, and the idle animation at the moment doesn't have any keyframes, so it's just going to be sitting in space like this, okay? If you want to get fancy, you might be smart and grab the first keyframes of our play and paste them into idle. Just that way you can see that our sword stays up in the air here, right? So now it's like, okay, cool, play takes it from here to here, and our idle animation starts up in the sky, okay? So yeah, so don't worry too much if it's pretty janky right now, if it's jumping around a lot or you don't have idle filled out at all. We'll worry about that at the end, okay? But do flick me a message if you guys are having problems. I'll try and get through to them before I come back. Otherwise, we'll deal with them when we get back. And again, make sure that you're working in 2019.3.7 F1, so this thing up here, okay? And if you don't have the Universal Render Pipeline or Universal Project, just download the template that I dropped further up. I'll pin that as well so that you guys have that. And let me pin this real quick. Pin message. And what I'll also do as well, really quickly, is I'm just going to drop this week where we're at right now into channel. Obviously keep in mind that if you don't have my, actually you will have the scene and stuff as well. Just make sure that's saved. Just reset that. I'll just drop those files in just in case you guys are totally lost and you're trying to catch up, okay? Ideally use your ones though if you've got them, because obviously I want you guys to work on your own animations, and at the end of this hopefully we get to see some really cool dope animations that you guys have worked on rather than just the ones I've built, alright? Okay, cool beans. See you guys back in 30 minutes. Be good. Okay, team, we're back. The idle loop until it gets triggered. Oh, good timing. So it should if you go to your idle clip, you can go set loop time on it up here. The way we're structuring the idle is that it's implicitly just going to be one keyframe, right? It's going to be a moment in time. It's kind of just going to be a reset button almost, right? It's going to put everything back to where it should be and just keep it there. So for our own sake, we can probably accept that our idle doesn't need to loop. But yeah, you can just set it over here in the inspector by selecting it and you know, ticking it in the loop time option. Okay. Cool. So let's go ahead and let's keep animating this. So make sure you have this, you know, VFX effect. Hopefully by now you guys have something resembling an animation. You know, if we play this, jumps into the ground, and I mean it's a bit you know, vanilla maybe. Would be good if it rotated or something. So maybe we'll rotate it a bit in the ground. Oh nope, sorry. Let's make sure we hit record. Let's go ahead. I'm going to turn it from local to global, and maybe we'll just do this, and maybe if I go back to local space, I'll try and oh sorry, my bad. I'm making a big oopsie here. Please don't do what I just did. Make sure that when you're editing it, that you're editing the sword. Okay, you don't want to animate the VFX part. So you could obviously animate the VFX part. You could go here, click on the VFX, and you can move this. And you can see that we add a VFX part. This is arguably quite dangerous to do, just because we might want to move the VFX part around, right? We might want to say, actually, it's gonna happen. This animation's gonna happen here, okay? Or it's happening here, but it's rotated this way, so it's coming in from this angle. So keep in mind that if you keyframed the VFX, the positions you set to it in world space are going to be overridden, okay? So please don't keyframe your parent object. There's a reason why it's just an animator. We want to just be able to bind everything to that space. In this case, we've kind of grounded it, we've pivot pointed it where the sword's going to come in, because that kind of makes sense, right? Like, you imagine if I wanted to spawn this effect in the world, I want to spawn it where the crack is going to happen, where the explosion is going to happen, where the shockwave is going to happen. I don't want to spawn it anywhere else. So do keep in mind that you want to have this, you know, maybe not zeroed out, but you want to have it wherever you want the effect to happen, and you want to make sure you do not keyframe your parent object with the animator, okay? So let's go ahead again. Just going to go back to here. Maybe make it rotate some. Maybe I'll go local space and I'll spin it like this. It's going to go like that, right? And I don't really want it to like pivot in the ground at the end. It's kind of weird. So I'll just paste these keyframes back over. Cool, like that, sweet. And you know, again, we could get fancy and we could maybe add a keyframe to make it you know, nicely. I mean, Y probably doesn't need to have as harsh of a drop here, because, you know, we probably makes you want to move linearly through the space, or maybe even arguably the other way around, right? When I ease in, ease out, so it's almost like sliding in like that. But you know, we're getting pedantic here. I'll leave you guys to tweak and tune these as you see fit. That is really whack, and I hate that. Anyway, we'll leave it as it was. So let's have a think about our first effect we're going to add, okay? Because the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a shockwave. We're going to build a shockwave that expands out. But to do that, we're going to work in Blender first and foremost, okay? I'm going to open up Blender. I'm going to delete everything. Going to add a new plane, okay? Now, can anyone tell me at a guess? Also, for context, I'm going to drop this OBJ file into the channel at the end, okay? Just in case you guys don't have Blender installed. You could obviously follow along with us in Maya or Max. We're not going to build anything complex. We're really just going to be working with primitives, and we're going to be thinking about a couple of things. First things first is we're going to think about where our vertices are. and how our shape is deformed. And the second is we're going to think about how our UVs are laid out, okay? Because this is a really important concept when thinking about custom effects. Because with this shockwave, we're going to do something really fucking dope. We're going to make it rise up off the ground, okay? It's going to look sick. It's going to be awesome. But to do that, we need to have vertex offsets. We need to be able to move our vertices. And to do that, well, we need vertices, and we need a high amount of them, actually. So, generally speaking, you would do this with tessellation. Tessellation is fancy and expensive, and it's going to make our model a lot more complicated to do uneven levels of tessellation. And I don't even know if Unity Shader Graph handles tessellation in 2019, so we're just not going to do that. We're just going to have a really, really dense mesh, okay? It's not very optimal, but you know what? Who cares? I'm not too fussed if this isn't the most crazy optimal thing. I'm going to edge loop the hell out of this, okay? I'm going to edge loop it to the nth degree. So I'm going to edge loop like this. I'm going to edge loop it like this. And I'm just going to unwrap. Just double check my unwrap's fine. Pretty sure it should be all good. Yeah, sweet. Yeah, using Maya is fine. I can't remember where the subdivide button is in Blender. I haven't used 2.8 too much, so I'm a little bit of a noob again. But that's okay, you know, we're not doing anything too complex here. All we really care about is that we've got, you know, regular UVs laid out, because we're going to use the UV space to do some work. And on top of that as well, we want a rich amount of vertices. I could probably also go ahead and do it with a subdivision surface modifier. But I don't really want it to subdivide. I don't want to. I think I could probably do it by creasing all the points, because if I'm honest, what I really care about is that I get. I just want UVs to be laid out pretty regularly. I don't want anything complex with them. Just a regular projection is fine. Maybe I'll be fancy and I'll bump it up to, I don't know, maybe like two subdivisions. I mean, this is pretty dense. How many? Yeah, this is 6,000 verts. I mean, this is probably hitting ridiculous levels. Maybe we'll bring it down to 1. Yeah, I mean, it's 1.6k verts. This is probably a bit overkill. But you know what? Let's roll with it. I'm gonna export as OBJ. Also, I'll just apply this real quick. Make sure this is all, yeah, UV done fine. That's perfect. Export OBJ. I'm gonna go ahead. Gonna drop into our project. Workshop Big 10. I'm gonna call this shockwave plane. I'm just gonna leave the transforms as they are. I think it's actually the wrong coordinate system, but you know what? We'll just fix that in editor. I'm not too fussed about that. I'm gonna make sure to untick right materials. Make sure that the UVs are included. I just want the mesh. I just want the normals. I just want the UVs. I don't want anything else fancy. I'm gonna go export OBJ. I'm gonna come back and we're gonna have this plane. Okay, I'm gonna drop this in. Actually, before I do that, though, I'm gonna do one more thing. I'm just gonna rename this in the hierarchy. Where's that gone? Outliner. I just want to make sure that this is called something not unreasonable, because I don't want to have 10 more defaults in my project like I did last time. Okay, I'm gonna save myself that heartache. Let's export again. Let's just double check that's done correctly. No, it's cool. Still called default, isn't it? Of course it is. I believe in Blender that's because I have to export as OBJ groups rather than OBJ objects. Let's try that. Nope, still not playing nice. Well, that's always ideal. You know what, for now, we won't worry too much about that. It's not too important to our system. Maybe if I delete though, we try that real quick. How's that looking? Oh, there we go, now it's renamed properly, bro. Cool. I'm gonna drop this guys to you, just because, again, I'm not too fussed if you guys don't have Blender installed. You know, use whatever's comfortable. If you want to use Max or Maya, it's totally fine. We're not doing anything complex, not doing anything Blender specific, hopefully. But yeah, feel free to just grab that as well from the channel if you need it, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna drag this in. We're gonna drag it underneath the VFX effects. you're gonna see we've got this nice little plane, and it's obviously Z fighting quite a lot, which is a little bit bad. We're not gonna worry about that too much for now. Let's go ahead, let's just drag it up. Fraction, I'm gonna drag it up to 0.01. Yeah, it's fractionally off the ground, just so we don't have that Z fighting, because that's gonna annoy me. And we're gonna go ahead and let's build the shockwave effect. I'm gonna make a little folder for it. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start grouping things into folders just to make my life a little bit easier. I'm gonna call this animator or animation, let's say. Drag all this stuff in here. So let's go into shockwave. Let's go right click, create shader. Let's go unlit graph. Okay, we're gonna call this shockwave, and we're gonna kind of breeze through these systems because we're not. I don't want to spend too long walking through the exact minutiae of all this. I want us to focus on the big high-level picture of taking all these components together and animating. So if you miss out on a couple of bits, you miss out on the vertex offsets, it's okay. There are definitely tutorials out there about vertex position and such. Do feel free to look them up, okay? So we're going to go ahead. We're going to grab...
Oh, what kind of shader graph is this?
An unlit graph. Unlit shader graph. Yep. Okay, bro. So first things first, we're going to go ahead and we are going to do a distance. We're going to grab our UVs, conveniently. I'm going to do the regular thing of splitting them and then binding them into a vector 2. So we're just working with our R and our G, okay? Going to check that in. Going to check in 0.5, 0.5 to get our delightful little grayscale dot circle, right? Okay. And then we're going to go distance again. And I'm going to grab a, I'm going to make a parameter over here, okay? So this, I don't know if we necessarily tackled so much yesterday. This is quite important, okay? So your material, your shader, has parameters and constants, okay? So constants sit inside your code. You're not allowed to touch them as a material. You're not allowed to change them between different materials of the same shader. But your parameters or your properties, your keywords, these can be changed, okay? So we're going to go ahead, we're going to make a vector 1, and we're going to call this, let's call it pulse. Going to change the reference to pulse, okay? Because I want these names to be the same. Keep in mind you can't have spaces in this, okay? Not allowed. You have to have no spaces, it has to be underscores, okay? And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to make a slider between 0 and 1, okay? And I'm just going to drag it in. You could also just type in down here, pulse, okay? Now it's important you get this parameter because we're going to animate this part. Okay, this is the thing that we're going to be changing in the animation timeline, and the animator is going to be changing for us. So we're going to drive the values in our shader from this parameter. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag this into this. You can see at the moment it does nothing because, well, our default value is 0. So let's go ahead and change the default value to 0.25, hit enter, and we'll see now we get a ring. We covered this very, very briefly last week. And we're going to use this as our kind of founding principle when working with the system. So we've got that now, brill. Let's go ahead, let's chuck in a clamp, and let's chuck in a remap. Gonna grab those two together. I'm gonna clamp it from 0 to, let's say, 0.2, 0, and 0.2, 0, 0.2. And you see that when we do that, just like last week, we're clamping at 0 here and at 0.2 here. So we're essentially setting a start and an end, and then we're rebinding that. So set the distance to 0.5, 0.5. Because essentially what we want to say is we want to say how far away are you from the middle of the UVs. And that will get your one working. Look. Cool. I might even be fancy actually. I might even say we want to clamp at a minimum of 0.1 as well. So now we get a nice fat kind of ring, right? It's not just going to be a peak. You imagine if we look at our space, rather than being, so here's the full gradient from 0 in the center to 1. When we say 0 to 1, 0 to 0.2, let's say, we're going to get a peak that's going to be like this. But if we do 0.1 and 0.2, we're going to get something that looks like this, okay? which is going to be a little bit more interesting to work with. Then what we're going to do is I'm just going to chuck a power over here. We don't have to do this. This makes things a bit nicer because it's going to round off our edges. So rather than having linear edges like this, we're going to have nice smooth curves, okay? It's going to be a rounded edge, which is cool. And then what we're going to do at the end is we're going to go 1 minus. And we're going to get that. Okay? So, just really quick overview of that again. UVs split to vector 2, getting the RNG components because we want the UVs. Then we get the distance to 0.5, 0.5, the middle of the UVs. Then we get the distance to our pulse parameter, okay? And take that, we clamp and remap it. So when I say clamp remap, what I mean is we chuck some values into our clamp, so 0.1 and 0.2, and these become our in min max for our remap, 0.1, 0.2, and we remap that back to 0 to 1 space. Then we power it to get a nice fall off, and we do 1 minus. Okay, you guys can play around with these values. You might find that, you know, something like this looks nice. This gets you really soft kind of fall off. Maybe we want like maybe we want it to be quite, you know, thin. Maybe it's like 0.1 like this. Play around with the values that work, and if you want to get fancy, you should probably go ahead and arguably even set these up to be parameters on the side, right? So you can tweak and tune them without having to manually enter them in every single time, okay? As well, we're going to follow advice that you given from a student last week, I think. We're going to right click down here and we're going to hit quad. And that's going to ensure that we can see what our preview looks like on a quad rather than on a sphere, because a sphere is not really accurate to what we're going to be working with today. We're going to be working with a quad. Cool beans. I'm going to rearrange my graph real quick just to make things a little bit neater. Now, we've got this great little pulse. If I hit save asset, let's go back to our scene. Let's right click on our shader. Let's go create material. It's going to create a material from our shader, which is perfect, okay? And I'm going to drag that onto the quad in the middle. And in the moment, you're going to see it does nothing. So we have to make sure that we tie this 1 minus to our color, okay? I'm going to save asset again. I'm going to go back. And you're going to see now that if we move this, the ring pulses out from the middle, okay? Now, can anyone tell me what issues we have with this shader so far? There's 2 problems that we can already see. Very quick last bit, all I did is I attached the output from that very last node to the color of the unlit master, okay? So remember that unlit master is like your output. You're saying, hey, what am I taking from the nodes? Yeah, cool, so it heads the corners and vanishes abruptly, perfect. The hash square, perfect. What else about it? When does it disappear off the square? Because right now,
the borders of the mesh.
Yep.
So it's going to look really ugly. It doesn't just fade away. You can see the edges.
Yep, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, because that mesh cornering is very ugly, right? And not very nice at all. As well, yeah, it fades off at 0.8, right? Like around 0.8, it's gone. But we've still got, you know, 0.2 between 0.8 and 1 of motion that's not doing anything on the thing. That's not very good, right? What else? What happens when it's at 0?
Still visible at 0.
100%. That's not good, right? Like, we don't want to start. This effect's going to start at 0 and end at 1. We want it to come in nicely and wrap up nicely. So we need to fix both of those things. Cool, perfect. So let's start working on that, right? First things first. Now we're gonna play around with some magic numbers here, but actually there's some very clear math that defines how to figure this out, right? We're gonna go add a remap. We're gonna drag our pulse into our remap and then drag it back to distance. We're gonna set our remap from 0 to 1 and exit at 0 to 1. Now, look, we could discuss how the math here works. We know, technically speaking, that to get the edge of this off, we have to use the difference between these 2 values. We have to use this larger value. So we technically have to have this set to as our output negative 0.1, and we'll add a bit of padding, so negative 0.11 and 1.11. And you see now if this is 0, our texture's black, right? So that works. But we could just play around with these numbers. We could say, you know what? how high does this have to be for us to, you know, oh look, okay, about this point it's gone, right? And you know, if you have a look at this value, it's 0.11. You could play around with it and tweak and tune that as you see fit. We've got one problem though. At the other end, if I set this pulse to 1, you know, it's well and truly off the screen. Now, the reason for that is because you think about this, right? We calculated a distance. Now this distance here is 0.5, okay? It's half the UV, right? That makes sense. It's just moving an X, has to travel half the UV, it's distance 0.5. Now this value here is not 0.5. It is a right angled triangle, right? And if we remember a bit of basic math, we know a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So if I draw that for you, right? We've got a little triangle here. A, B, and C, a little right angle, right? So we know that this distance here is not equal to 0.5. If we run the math really quickly, because, you know, I've got a calculator, I've got Google, I lied to you, right? Grab Google, we say 0.5 to the power of 2 plus 0.5 to the power of 2. Okay, well that's 0.5, great, right? And what is the square root of 0.5? It's 0.707, okay? So actually, we need to do something to this so that that corner is 1, because we want the space to be from 0 to 1. We want to know that when we hit 1, we're at the edge of the space, and when we're at 0, we're at the beginning of the space. So we're going to go ahead, I'll just drag this out a little bit. We're just going to go divide, because if we divide a number by itself, it's equal to 1, okay? So over here, we think this value is 0.701, so let's just divide it by 701, okay? You could also as well type square root, pass in 0.5, and chuck that number in there as well. That would also be fine. If you don't have the slider on the material zone, you need to go over to the mode over here and set it to slider. Make sure it's slider and set the, I think the min and max default to 0 and 1 for you, okay? Cool beans. So I'm gonna do that, and then I'll attach this over to here. And you should see now that when we have the set to 1, it's fully off. You know, if set to 0.95, let's say, we just see it on the corner. It's not on the material. Are you sure it's got the exposed ticked? And have you got it as a property over here? Make sure exposed is ticked. And make sure that the material you've made is using your shader. It should only have one property. It should only have this pulse property. And if it doesn't have, make sure you've hit save asset at the top left. Until you hit that, it won't save it. Okay. So now that we've remapped that, you can see quite clearly if we take the shockwave from 0, expands out and goes fully off the square, especially just at the end, right? Which is what we want. We don't want it to be lingering on the square. We want a little bit of padding on either side to make sure we fully, you know, wrap off and come on properly, but aside from that, we're fine. Now we still have a problem. One of the students mentioned it. We have a harsh square, okay? That's very, very true. We do have a harsh square. So how do you guys think we can fix that? Also, while people are answering that, Zane, did you manage to get it to work by following the things I mentioned? Or is it still broken? Oh, perfect. Great. Awesome. So the remap values, we set it to negative 0.1 and 1.11. Now keep in mind, I've got my max value in this remap, like clamp remap, is 0.1. So that's why I have negative 0.1 and 1.1. You imagine you need to overshoot and undershoot by that clamp value, okay? So that clamp max value, so if you set this to 0.2, you need to be this 0.21. But again, play around with these values. It's also totally okay to just eyeball this, right? To just say, oh, the value I need to get it fully off screen is roughly this. That's totally fine, okay? If we're being really fancy, we would set these up as parameters and make them mathematically agree. So rather than having this number here and this number here, we would have one number over here that we feed into both of them, okay? But just in the sake of sanity and making this easy, we're not going to do that. Okay. So we've got these harsh square, this harsh square still. Let's fix that. You know, let's have a think about that. So we've got this shader here. That's perfect. Okay. Now we're actually going to grab this one here because we know in this case this distance here 0.5 is when we need to be fading it off by. If we don't fade it off by this point, we've got problems. So let's go ahead. Let's add another clamp and remap. We'll take this value, chuck it into here. Now we're going to clamp it at quite different values this time. We're going to clamp it at 0.45 and 0.5. And we're going to remap it back exactly the same way we did it last time. You know, we're going to chuck in the in value and the out value here. Just like that, okay? And I'm going to 1- it again. Because we're going to build this as a mask. We're going to say we're allowed to draw up to the edge, but we're not allowed to draw in these sections, okay? So that way it's going to fade off nicely. We're going to take this, and before we feed into the color, we're just going to multiply these two things together. Okay, and we hit save asset. Let's go back to our scene. Let's give this a shot. Okay, so we pulse, expands out, and it goes away. Cool, perfect. Now you can kind of see that we've created a different problem, and that now we get to 0.77, and well, actually we've kind of reached the end of the thing, right? Surely we've well and truly gone beyond it. So this is the downside to doing it the way that we have, is that the remap values we had here work perfectly, right? When we go all the way to the edges of the corner, but we don't want to go to the edge of the corner because at that point, if we want this to be like a real circle, we need to actually be gone by those parts. So we might just play around with this number and tweak and tune it. But what we could actually just do is we could think about what we're trying to accomplish here. So we probably don't even need the square root. We can probably just chuck this in and let's see what this works. Okay, so let's give that a shot. So now we reach it at 0.5. Well, that makes sense, right? Because we're fading. We're only ever going to get to here. This is going to be our max value. So we can actually set this to only be 0.61. Oh, have to be a bit bigger than that. That's fine. Let's go 7. Oh, sorry, 6, sorry. And again, we could talk for quite a while about how this works exactly, but the important thing is that we have something that roughly works. And so in this case, fudging around with these numbers is totally fine. The fade off here, the last part, okay, we took our distance, we clamped it, our upper value being 0.5 and our lower value being somewhere lower than that. We remapped it from that min range and that max range to 0 to 1 again. And then we chucked it into a 1-, okay? Because white is on and black is off, okay? So we want to mask it with the black and say, nope, don't accept any colors outside of that, okay? Is everyone making sense with that so far? It's gonna be really hard to export this. Let's drag this over here. And again, you might have to play around with some values to make it work properly, but we're not too fast if it's a little bit dodgy at the moment, okay? So that bit up there is just the clamp. Yeah, sorry about the size. I actually can't zoom in any further than this. Let me get a good screenshot of that for you. Okay, and that's getting multiplied. And again, take some time to make sure your graph is nice and neat and readable, okay? You'll save yourself a lot of time and a lot of hassle, okay? Also, I rebound the remap out value down here to something else, but again, I just did that because I wanted to make sure that at the end of it, it's fully off this circle, okay? Cool. So now we've got that. Let's go ahead and change some properties on the unlit master part. Let's go over here. We're gonna hit this tick, and we're gonna turn it to transparent and additive, because we want, right? We want this circle to expand outwards, and we want it to just add some color to our scene. So we're gonna hit save asset once we've done that. We're gonna go back to scene, and you're gonna see now that we have this nice material that starts at a point, expands outwards, and disappears. Okay? Has everyone got that so far? Has everyone got that kind of expanding circle? let's do okay. If yep, so let me just screenshot that for you guys. All I did is hit the little tick next to the unlit master part, and then make sure it's set to transparent, and make sure it's set to additive. Okay. Now the great thing about additive is that it sees that black is nothing, right? It's just it doesn't add anything because it's 0, 0, 0. It's leaving a shadow underneath. That's also totally somewhat fine. It's not ideal, obviously, but we can fix that. We can go to here, we can go to cast shadows and turn off. Okay. If you want to do that, just left click on this, go to your mesh, go to the lighting part, and just turn off the cast shadows. Zane, if I snip this like this, can you see that? That's gonna be the real question. I really wish I could export. Amplify is this really lovely feature where you just click a button, it just exports out all of your screenshot, so your node tree at a really high res. Is that legible? The values might be a little bit hard to read, but yeah. That Luke is caused by, I think, Z fighting and shadow acne. So just go to your mesh. So left click on your mesh, and over on the mesh renderer part, go to lighting and make sure it has cast shadows set to off. Okay, that's just going to ensure that it doesn't cast any shadows. Cool. Okay, don't worry too much if you're missing a couple of nodes or it's a little bit janky. We just want something to work with, and this is all gonna be recorded, and so hopefully you guys will be able to go back over this if you've missed out on something. So let's go ahead and let's actually think about the next cool thing we want to do. So we want to make this raise, like that's gonna look really sick, right? If we can make this raise up into the air. Now Unity is gonna be a little bit fussy. And make sure you hit save asset jack, save asset in the top left, and make sure it's connected to the unlit master part, okay? So, and also obviously tweak and tune the pulse value so that you can see it. You might have to put it into somewhere in the middle so you can see the shockwave, okay? So one slight problem about Unity, it's a little bit frustrating, is you see if I grab this, see how these lines are unconnected, okay? That's because Unity doesn't want us to pass something that's going into the color path also into the position vertex normal or vertex tangent parts. There's a long, it was on the shockwave plane, Luke, yeah. So the reason for that is because internally they're happening in different pathways of the shader. One of them's happening in a frag shader, one of them's happening in a surf shader, but we don't need to worry too much about the specifics. The long and short of it is that it doesn't want to allow us to pass in that value, okay? But we can get around this quite easily. It's a little bit frustrating, admittedly. We're going to copy this. And we're going to paste it, okay? And we're going to drag it up here. So we're going to copy that whole thing and we're going to drag it up here. Now, you can see before we can't connect this to these. But I can connect this to whichever one I want. And that's just because internally Unity doesn't want that code to go to two places because they have to happen in different pathways. They have to happen in different ways. I'm not really sure why they haven't fixed that. It's honestly a little bit appalling. But just please do understand that this code up here, right, is a duplication of what we have down here, okay? It's exactly the same. I'm not going to touch it a tad, okay? And later, when we make edits to this, we're going to copy it up here. Actually, maybe for sanity's sake, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go preview, okay? I'm going to chuck this into this, and then chuck this into the color. I don't think I can do it this way. Hold up. Oh, okay. Hold up. Actually, okay. Well, we might have just solved this. Big brain. Okay. Shoot. Well, that makes it easy. Okay. Okay, we're not gonna copy it. I lied to you guys. I thought we would have to copy it. I'm very sorry for that. I have tricked you all and tricked myself. So we're gonna have it dragged in. what we're going to do is we're going to use this to edit our vertex position. Now, we know that in this case, we can just use our normals. Okay, so we're going to type in... Actually, we're going to make it even simpler. We're just going to use... Oh, no, we'll use normals. So we're going to go normal vector. Okay. Now, we're going to have to set it to object space. Because if I pull this out, you can see that over here it says object space, okay? Our vertex positions are happening in object space, so we need to make sure our normal vector is in object space as well. We're going to multiply it. So we're going to multiply this color by our normal vector, okay? And we're going to pass it into position. I'm going to hit save. And you're going to see down in our preview that something wild is happening, right? Can anyone tell me why they think that's happening the way that it is? Like, I can't even see the plane. It's gone. It's totally bonkers. Why is that happening the way that it is? Can anyone tell me? There is, in fact, an answer to this question, by the way. This isn't a rhetorical. Yep, so part of it is that it's not two-sided. So if we go over here, we hit two-sided. That might make it visible. But it doesn't seem to be. So why is it, if you have a look at this little preview down here, you can kind of see it a little bit more clearly. It's creating this very weird kind of scrunchy kind of shape. So it is super stretched, but the problem is that what's happening is we just pass this into vertex position, okay? This is not a vertex offset. This is a real 3D vertex position in object space. So we have to do something first. We have to say, hey, actually, make sure to add your current position, okay? Don't forget that, you know, you're an actual, you know, you're in space already. You need to add your actual position, okay? Because otherwise, we're going to be setting real positions. We're saying, hey, in object space, you are at 0, 0, 0, or you are at 0, 1, 0. We want to make sure that we take into consideration that this particular vertex might be a little bit stretched over the left, might be a little bit over the right. Okay, so we're going to hit save asset, and you're going to see that now we have a sick-looking, ridiculously OTT explosion outwards. So all I did in that last step, so we multiplied it by the normal vector, make sure the space was set to object. So we took our thing, we multiplied it with the normal vector because we want to make sure we go up with the plane, and then we added it onto, again, the object space position, okay? And then we chucked that into vertex position. So we calculated how much we want to move off. We say that we want to move up by this amount, and then we added it to our position so it's in, it's relative to where the vertex was originally set. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead, and I'm also going to add one more bit. I'm going to add a multiplier here, because at the moment this is honestly a bit ridiculous. Maybe I'll put the multiplier over here, just to make things a bit more sane. Because, you know, that was really cool, but it was also, you know, way too over the top. It was too much, right? Like, it's obviously too much. So let's go ahead and let's set this multiplier down at 0.1 or something like that. Okay, it's because we don't want it to hype up too much. We want it to stay relatively sane, right? It's like that. That looks pretty cool. Cool. So that sounds really pretty cool, and this is the reason why as well we needed so many vertices. Okay, so if you see, you can see that only our vertices are being affected by this vertex offset. Okay, we're not moving this pixel here, we're not moving this pixel here, we're not moving this pixel here, we're moving the vertices only. Okay, so if you go back to the shader, you can actually see the ripples of where there essentially are not vertices to smoothly map this out. If we want to get fancy, obviously we could try and resolve this, but sometimes the solution in these cases is to just kind of throw more at it. And in this case, we're not trying to build a map-wide displacement map or a terrain or anything like that. We've got this tiny little effect. Make sure if you have that, Jack, that you're clamping the value at the end between 0 and 1. My gut feeling is there's some sort of a unclamping happening there. and that's giving you massive negative values. If you just want to clamp a value, just type in clamp and just chuck that into the clamp. Just that's going to make sure that you don't have a negative value here. Yep, and Ledry's gone to it. You just want to go to the lighting part, and yeah, not on the plane mesh. Oh yeah, on the shockwave plane mesh. Yeah, not on the ground plane, but on the shockwave plane. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna snipping tool this last little bit for you guys. Just clamp it before you chuck it into this multiply. So put it somewhere in here. So clamp it before you multiply it. Cool. So that's looking pretty cool. Maybe I'll quickly play around with some values. I'll make it a little bit spikier in the middle. Cool. You know, make it look like this. Did that actually save? Maybe not. Who knows? I mean, it seems to. That's good. Save asset again. Okay, cool. That looks pretty cool. Sweet. It doesn't show up at a value of 0. Just play around with these remap values on your pulse, okay? Because you want your pulse to be between 0 and 1. You want to think 1 is the end of it, 0 is the beginning of it. And you just need to remap it so that for your space it works. Obviously, again, we could get really fancy and talk about how exactly to calculate that. But actually, it's going to be a lot of work. And we're not really here to have this perfect shader that's mathematically pure. We're trying to build an effect, right? And effects are messy, they're noisy, yeah, accounting for all these features is going to become more and more complex as we add more to the shader. So for now, it's just easier to say, these values work, and they're relatively sane. Cool. So I might go ahead, I might even maybe bump up the power or something like that. Maybe even lower the power. Maybe try that the other way around. Yeah, whatever. We'll play around with that later. I mean, for now, it's good enough, So we've got the shockwave, and you can see that that's going to look pretty cool. It's going to expand outwards. Now, we could add a lot to this, think about we could add a texture to it as well. We could sample a texture, and that would add a lot of value because you'd kind of get some cool bits of oscillation. Just for context, we'll show you that really quickly, but then we're going to chuck it away. We could do something like this, right? If I drag this bit off to the right, I drag this in. I go ahead and I chuck an add in here, and go, and boom, and boom, and is that gonna really? Oh yeah, we'd have to do some LOD sampling instead because it's this is where things get very, very complex very quickly. But again, we're not gonna keep it, so don't worry if we're missing this part. Okay, we could add something like this, and then you can see we get this really cool little smoky setup, and we could say, oh, no, it was kind of meh. But we could start to add over it a ton of interesting and rich features here. Okay, so keep in mind that we're just going to kind of breeze through this as much as possible. But obviously what we're building here could kind of go well and truly beyond what we're expanding it to do. Oh wait, what now? Man, okay, I'm gonna have to trick Unity again. It's ridiculous. Also, for context, if you can't reattach it, you have to disconnect these nodes, then reattach them. It's ridiculous. I swear to God, Unity wants to make me drive a stake through it at some point. Oh, so just make sure, Jack, in here you clamp this. Okay, you clamp, and then you chuck it into the multiplier. Okay. Otherwise, you're gonna create some problems. Cool. Okay, well that's good enough for now. We've got that shockwave emitting out. That's pretty cool. We've got some vertex displacement. That's a pretty sick little feature to have. So let's think about the next thing we're going to work on, because we want to kind of breeze through a couple of effects here. Your shockwave disappear. My gut feeling is you need to add the position on Dion. Okay, if you don't have that, you're going to not be considering where the vertex was originally, and you have to do that because you're really building an offset, right? Not a true position. Okay, cool. So we've got the shockwave. Awesome, sick. Let's go ahead. Let's make an explosion. Okay. I'm gonna go back to Blender. Just gonna delete this. I'm gonna make a new cylinder. Okay. I'm gonna give you this file again, so don't sweat it if you're you don't have this, you know, you're stressing, okay? It's gonna be okay. We'll get through this together. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm just gonna delete the top face and the bottom face. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna mark a seam on the side, because I want to unwrap this really cleanly. I want this to be a nice, nicely laid out in my UVs, okay? I'm gonna cool this really quickly. Let's call this shock, or let's call this explosion. I'm gonna go ahead and cool this explosion as well. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go, I'll mark it as smooth. I don't think it should matter for this because we're gonna be using it just as a regular setup. Oh, Finn, what are you doing? Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna unwrap it. Let's split this real quick. I think it's horizontal. No, not horizontal split. Vertical split. Let's have a look at the UVs. Okay, well our UVs are a little bit wrong, but that's okay. We can fix this pretty easily. We're gonna go, constrain to image bounds. Gonna drag them all the way to the right. Okay, because we want to have it laid out so that we're using up the full space for now at least. And once I've done that, the great thing is I can now, scale this in. I'm gonna scale it in quite small. I'm gonna scale this. I'm gonna leave this at 1 actually, and leave like a little cone. Maybe I'll go ahead and I'll grab it down. I'll just drag it down like this. We have a nice little clean cone like this. Now you can see that our UVs haven't changed at all, okay? And this is important because we want this to be 0 here and 1 up here. And that way we can clearly push something through this space. Okay? Now, I'm gonna go ahead and export this as an OBJ. And I'm gonna make a new folder for it. We're gonna call this explosion. Let's just call it explosion. Explosion cone. Yep, I'm gonna drop you this this OBJ, so don't worry too much. I don't necessarily need you guys to model this. You guys can take your own time to work through modeling it in Maya or Max or Blender. It's just important we have this so we have some specs to essentially work with. Because oftentimes a quad is not really an adequate setup, and neither is a sphere, and neither is a cube primitive. UV-wise, they're not necessarily optimal for the types of effects we're working with. So we're going to call this explosion cone. I'm going to go ahead and drop it here. And I'm going to go ahead and do something a little bit interesting, okay? And this is going to be UV work. This is something that I think you guys should think very clearly about when you're working on this. Make sure that you've set it to transparent additive, Jack. So we're going to grab this. I'm going to grab it on X. I'm just going to drag it back a bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select every second vertex here. It's going to be a little bit tedious. Let's just do it this way. Now, can anyone guess as to why I'm going to do this? Any takers for why I would be grabbing every second vertex like this and dragging them out like that? It looks very similar to Jack's. Make sure that you're just passing it into the color parameter, and make sure that if it is still having issues, clamp it between 0 and 1 at the end. You might be having some overflow. Yeah, Fraser, boom. Perfect. So we're going to use some zigzags on the explosion. And the cool thing is we're not actually going to edit this mesh at all, but we're just going to have our UVs laid out in quite an interesting fashion. So I'm going to export this. I'm just going to call this explosion cone. Let's say spike. Well, actually, explosion spike cone, let's say. Cool. So I'm going to drop both of those files to you guys so you guys can play around with them. You have a gray circle for some reason. Check your default value in the left-hand side, Zane. Might just be set to like 0.1. If it's set to 0 and you still have that, or you set to, let's say, like 1 and you still have that, you need to change the remap values down here so that you so that it's off screen by the time your value is 1. So let's go ahead. Let's drag our 2 OBJs in. We're going to see immediately that we've got this cone, and because we've got 2 cones actually on top of each other, They're both, not visible. We only need to really see one. We've got this cone, and that's cool. Sweet. So let's have a think about this effect we're going to build on this, okay? So it's going to be kind of similar to the shockwave in that we're going to have something go outwards. But because of how we've laid our UVs out, we have the advantage that we can just use one direction rather than having to do a distance calculation. Because we know, right, from our layout of our UVs here, that at the bottom, if I make this sync, where is it going? Is this one? Here we go. UV sync slick. Here we go. So the bottom, right, before I added the spikes in, this bottom was on the left-hand side, and this top is on the right-hand side. So that means if we go left to right, we're going from the middle of the shape to the end of the shape. And that's going to be really, really useful. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to make a new shader, a new unlit graph, and we're going to call this explosion, okay? I'm going to open this up, and we're going to start working. So we're going to add some UVs. We're going to split them. This time we have the advantage. We actually don't need to worry about our R component, right? Or sorry, about our G component, because we're just going to be using our red component, just our 0 to 1 on the x-axis. So I'm going to chuck that in to color. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to make this transparent, additive, and two-sided. I'm going to go save. Okay, I'm going to snip this for you guys. It's a very simple shader. Just for now, at least, we don't have to worry too much about anything with this. We'll go back to our scene. Okay, we're going to make a material, just like before. Call this explosion. I'm going to drag it onto this. And you can see, if I drag it onto the other cone as well, drag onto this, and cool, they're both of them. So if I turn this cone off and I turn the regular cone on, you see that at the middle, it's black, right? And at the top, it's white. So those are our R values, right? That's the UVs we unwrapped. And the neat thing is, if we turn this one off, and turn this one on. Also, I forgot I was recording here. Hold up, let's delete these. Oh man, that's annoying. Let's really quickly rebind that. Let's go ahead and let's add our shockwave plane back to this, and explosion cone material here, and explosion material here. Okay. Now, if we look at our spike one, you can see that we have almost two gradients, right? We have one gradient here, it's going quite clearly to wide, and one gradient is not actually heading wide at all. And this is going to be really, really useful, because we're going to use this to make our effect work so well. Now, let's go ahead, let's go back to our shader really quickly, and we're going to build a very similar system to what we had just in the last shader, right? We're going to get the distance from a value. I'm going to call it pulse again. So again, we're going to make a new vector1 parameter. We're going to call it pulse. We're going to make it a slider between 0 and 1. I'm going to chuck it down here. I'm going to remap it because I'm not really sure if it's going to be remapping in the right range yet. And we're going to put it into the distance, okay? If we hit save, and we move this value forward, we see we get this nice band that moves forward as well, okay? So let's go ahead and let's do the same thing that we did with the other one. We're going to chuck it into a clamp and then a remap, because we want to move this value from 0 to 1 all the way out to, to here, to a much tighter band, so we just get a straight line that moves through our scene. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to say it's going to go from, say 0 to 0.1. So 0 to 0.1. And then at the end, we're going to go 1 minus, because we want to make sure that we get white in the middle, because we don't want to have it in the black parts, right? So we want this line to be progressing. And then you see as well, if I chuck this to 0, look what happens. Well, it's still, still on screen. That's not right. So we're going to have to change this to negative 0.11 or something of the sort to make sure it's off screen by the time it's done. And then we're going to set it the other way as well, so that when it's set to 1, it's fully off screen as well. So set it to 0.95, it's just on screen. And when it's 1, it's fully off screen. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to set that into color.
Just go back to your remap.
Yep, no worries.
Just want to... no, the first one, sorry.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So keep in mind that remap, right? All we're doing is we're just saying, look, to get it fully off screen at when pulse is 0, we actually need pulse to be a lot lower of a number, okay? So it's remapping the 0 to 1 space to a slightly larger range. And the advantage of that is that way we can kind of mentally in our head, right, want 0 to be off and 1 to be off but finished. So between 0 and 1 we'll be playing this kind of effect. We'll be moving this effect through the scene or through the object, through the mesh. And at the end of it, it's going to be fully moved through and all wrapped up. So that 0 and 1 are actually kind of analogous, right? They'll be identical in that they'll both be clean or empty or regular, right? And then that way, we can move this effect from 0 to 1, and we can put it back to 0, and not worry about there being some sort of weird jump or effect like that. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, and again, like we said before, we could obviously choose, we could mathematically figure out what values we need here, but actually in some ways it's easier to just play around with and say, okay, cool, when it's 1, I want all the effects to be off, so how far do I have to push it for that to be the case? Chi, I think you're about to say something.
No.
Oh, sorry. I thought I just almost cut you off there. That's all good.
Oh, no, it's fine.
Sweet. Cool. So we got this pulse now. Cool. Let me just snipping tool this real quick for you guys. So we got this cool little pulse effect. And, if we go back to our scene, we can see that our mesh is throwing a pretty ugly shadow. We're going to fix that, obviously, because we don't want that to happen. So we're going to turn that lighting off, we'll cast shadows off. And it's got this explosion material on it, so let's play around with this. So what happens when we do this? You're like, oh, look at that. So you can see quite clearly that when we use the spike cone, right, because of how our UVs are laid out, we actually end up with this very interesting kind of serrated effect on our output. And this is partially because if you think about our triangles in Blender, this here is not a quad, right? It's a set of 2 triangles. And the blend operations there, because we're not necessarily structuring all our triangles in the same direction, we will get some kind of weird artifacts. Now in this case, it's not a big deal. I'm not actually too fussed with this. I think this looks pretty cool. But if you were really fussy, you could kind of solve this a couple ways. You could subdivide this a couple of times, and that would help. So let's try this real quick. OBJ again, I'll just export over, see what happens now. You can see that kind of smooths out the spikes a little bit. Still not perfect, but it's a bit smoother. Or alternatively, you could do something fancy, like you could go through and make sure that the triangulation is correct, or you could have an edge loop here and have 2 things unwrapped next to each other. We could kind of pick and choose for days on end about what the best way of doing this is, but the reality is it's we're getting into kind of semantics here. For by and by, what we've actually got is a decent effect that's close enough to what we want, right? So I'm going to export this back over really quickly, just because I want to be working with the exact same thing I've given you. So we kind of got this weird serrated effect. I think it actually looks quite cool, but we'll just run with this for now. So you can see as well, we want to make sure that when our pulse is fully off, everything's gone, and when it's fully on, everything's gone as well. Now, we've got a bit of the same problem as the other one in that, if we go up to here, we have this weird, kind of triangle sitting in space, which is not very nice. So let's go ahead and let's just do it in the shader really quickly. It's the same thing pretty much that we did last time. We're just going to say, okay, cool, we're going to clamp, we're going to remap, so I'm going to chuck this distance in. Luke, make sure that you have it set to transparent and additive with 2-sided on the unlit master part. So we're just going to clamp this again, but rather than clamping a distance from in a 2-dimensional plane, we're just going to clamp a 1-dimensional distance, right? So we're going to say, rather than I think 0.45 and 0.5, we're going to say 0.9 and 1, 0.9 and 1. We'll chuck this into the remap. Now this is the wrong way around. So we actually have to think, oh, well, we're actually going to be traveling from this side to this side. So actually, what we need to do is we need to make sure, sorry, actually, we shouldn't be remapping the distance, we should be remapping just the R value. That's my bad. So make sure you're just passing the R value into this, not the distance. Sorry, that's my bad there. Cool. So we're going to do that. And then at the end, we're just going to go 1 minus because we want to make sure it's all on here and off at the end. And again, I'm just going to chuck a multiply because this is going to be our mask. And we want to make sure that we multiply by that mask at the end. Okay, because we don't want to, if this is 0, we don't want to accept it at all. How do you change the material? So to make the material with a shader, what you want to do is you want to right click on the shader, go create material, okay? You should be able to, oh, you mean on the, sorry, object. Yeah, so you can, so if we go to this explosion cone, we go to the mesh, you can see down here, here's this little explosion shader thing here. What you need to do is you need to change the material up here, okay? So you can drag it into this slot, or alternatively you can just drag it onto the object in the scene from the project view. So like, you know, left click and drag and put it over here, or left click and drag and put it up here. Okay. Cool bananas. So let's go ahead, let's save this asset, and let's have a look at that. Does that seem to be working now? Let's go ahead and let's move this forward. Doesn't seem to be working at all, which is never a good sign. So we're taking the UVs, we're clamping it. That seems fine. Aha! So, there's an interesting point here. So, the problem is, interestingly, if we think about our UVs never get to 1 for some of these points, right? This point never, this point's a bit slow on the uptake almost. So we actually have to shift our space back quite a lot. So we might say 0.1, 0.85, or maybe 0.7, 0.85. And again, this is where, you know, we could play around with mathematically pure answers and try and figure it out. But sometimes it's actually simply easier to just work in the editor. You can see we're not fading off properly at the tip of the spike. Okay, so we probably have to fix that. So we probably have to pull this further back, maybe 0.75. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, cool. That seems pretty good, but we're heading and then we're fading off. Okay, boom, look at that, perfect. And again, if we want to be fancy, we could even try and blend the bottom off as well. Again, that would just be another mask that would have to add on top of everything else we're doing. That's, I think, a really good example of how the UVs that you work with really heavily influence the design of your solution. So for instance, we go back to this really quickly. We could actually say that these are all the way over on the left-hand side, right? If I save this and I export this, and export this back over, you might find that now what happens is our explosions, they're all starting off at the same point and then they're stretching out at the end. And that's a really interesting setup. So again, so keep in mind that when you're working on this, there's not necessarily a right answer when building it, and be happy that, you know, you might drag out the right hand side and have it be softer at the beginning and then harsher at the end, and that's really cool, and work with what's there. Luke, did you manage to get the material to be working, or is it still black and totally overcooked? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and delete the regular explosion. I'm going to use the explosion spike cone only. But, you know, feel free to use whichever one you want. So we've kind of got two cool effects here already. Now, we scroll back up. What did we say we were going to do? We said we were going to do... Let's see. So sword box falls down with spinning trail and fluid movement. Sword box hit caught in ground. Explosion. Shockwave ripple. Crack. Chromatic aberration to get fancy. Okay. how about we add a spinning trail effect, and then we're gonna, then we are going to, if we're gonna animate it, and then if we have time, we'll look at the chromatic aberration, or maybe like some distortion or something, because we could definitely do that. It's really cool. But it's going to be a little more complex. We have to do a bit of setup because scriptable pipelines get really fancy and silly. So make sure, Luke, that your clamp and your remap values, so the clamp min-max should be your remap in min-max. So if you have it 0.7, 0.75, your remap should be 0.7, 0.75 in the in min-max. I have those two values for context. So you've set it correctly in the clamp, you just need to set it in the max and the remap as well. Cool bananas. So let's go ahead and let's add one more effect. Now, how are we gonna do this spiraling bit? What's the blueprints? If you look at let me step this real quick for you. Hopefully this makes a little bit of sense of what's happening here. Okay. So last little effect, let's build this little spiral bit. So let's have a think about this. How are we going to do this? Well, yeah, okay, I have an idea of how we might do this. Yeah, let's do this way. Let's call it spiral. I haven't really done anything like this. This might be quite interesting. I like that you guys are pushing me to do new stuff. It's good. Thanks, guys. So let's do it. Let's add a plane. I'm gonna rotate it and -90. Again, just keep in mind I'm just doing this really quickly so that we can move forward. Don't feel like that if you're missing this, or if you know you don't get this done in time, you're screwed. I'm gonna drop the files into class K, and then so you guys can think about how you would solve this on your own. I'm gonna split this a ton like that. So I've got this like nice little strip now. I'm gonna go ahead and unwrap it. I'm gonna go with, did I actually unwrap that? Is this like, hold up. Oh yeah, it's unwrapping, cool. I unwrapped properly, sweet. So we've got like UVs unwrapped pretty regularly, so, you know, this is the bottom, it's going upwards, cool, sweet, that's perfect. Obviously it's not you know, it's not the same. And I want it to go to the edges of the texture because it's easier to think about things in 0 to 1 space than it is to thinking about it in terms of, oh, I've got my, you know, my line over here, all the way over here. That's really difficult to deal with, right? If it's over at the edge, it's easy peasy. So what we're gonna do is, I'm going to spin this. I think I can do this with a modifier. Let's have we gander. Curve, no, it's, you know what, actually, we're going to be really lazy. We're going to do this like, oh, okay, I'm going to be sneaky. Let's do it this way. This is like probably not the right way of doing it. Trust in me being a bit of a blended noob to do this, okay? So I'm going to unwrap this. The great thing is I can trust that I can rotate these around axes. So I'm just going to rotate this 90 degrees. I'm going to rotate this 180. Actually, you know, well, maybe we'll even... Nah, we're gonna rotate them more. Yeah, we're gonna rotate another 90. And then we're gonna rotate this another 180. Okay, so it's gonna be really messed up. And then we're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna edge cut, edge... Ooh. Ah, no, okay, we'll leave it at 90 for now. That'll be fine. I'm gonna edge cut these. And then I'm going to edge cut again. And that's kind of good enough for now, actually. Honestly, I'm okay with that. That's fine. It's not perfect by any means, but it'll be close enough. And, you know, just for sanity sake, I'm going to shade it smooth, but probably doesn't even need it. Now, keep in mind the way I've done this is a little bit janky because these are actually not the right size. These should be a bit scaled up because they're going to be not as wide as these ones because of it's an edge cut, but you know, we could get fancy and spend hours doing this, but honestly we don't need to worry about it too much. Okay, so we're gonna go export OBJ. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna put this in spirals. I'm gonna call this spiral line. The explosion, yep, I will give you that now, Zane. Let's see if we can fit more on screen, eh? We can do better than this setup for sure. Can we fit more on? Surely. Let's straight this out. Here we go. That's a bit better. There we go. The transparent thing, just again, I think the majority of the shaders we're working with today will just do this, just because, again, it's just the easy way of doing this for now, because we don't have to worry about alpha blending or anything like that, or worrying about setting it. We're just working with color essentially. So black is off and white is on, which is nice and simple. Okay, so we've got a spiral line. Let me drag this. Oh, actually, hold up. Before I do that, let's rename it, because I should be doing that. Let's call this spiral. Spiral, great. Look at that. And here's that file. Look at that. Sweet. So we've got this little spiral. Let's go ahead and drag it in. And it's pretty big. That's pretty insane size, but we're not too fussed about that, because we know if we look at the UVs, it's all unwrapped and stuff. It's 0 to 1. So let's go ahead. Let's make a new shader unlit graph, and I'm actually going to be really basic with this one, which we could obviously get a lot more fancy and stuff, but we won't worry about it too much. We're going to call this spirals, and we're just going to do a distance. So we're just going to do exactly the same as we had in our shockwave, the split, beat to 2. We need the distance to the middle. R and G, distance, 0.5, 0.5. And then we're going to go ahead, I'm just going to clamp and remap this so that we're getting, some nice white values. Remap, nope, not reciprocal, remap. I'm going to set it to, say, like 0.25 and 0.5, 0.25, 0.5. And we're going to go 1 minus. Chuck this into color. I'm going to set it to transparent, additive. Okay, I'm going to go save asset. Yep, no worries, I'll screenshot that for you now. This one is a little bit harder to see just because it's a bit bulkier. Apologize in advance. How am I going to screenshot this? Do you need the specifics of the nodes, Jack, or do you need the whole thing?
I think it's the best the whole thing because I have a lot issue.
Okay. Let's I'm gonna give you a screenshot of the whole thing. And then I'm gonna give you a screenshot of little pieces, because this is not very legible, unfortunately. I really do wish that Unity had introduced some of these nice to have features from Amplify, like screenshotting your node tree, because it's very nice to be able to export out a very high quality node tree to someone and say, hey, look, here's a very good explanation of exactly how this node system works, without having to trust that they can zoom into microscopic levels. Okay. Cool. Okay. So let's go back to this spiral really quick. So we've got this, very simple shape. It's not anything too complex, and again, we could just do this with a texture if need be. But we don't want to get too fancy with that yet. I'm gonna make sure it's outside of the source. Don't want it to be. I want it to be here, next to all the other ones. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead. I'm going to make another material from the spirals. And again, don't fuss too much if you don't have these pieces or if something's really wrong. That's quite alright. Don't stress. Okay. We're not gonna. It's not gonna be the end of the world if you don't have these pieces. Now I'm gonna get a bit fancy. I'm gonna go create empty, and I'm gonna make an object, and we're gonna hold all the spirals, and we're gonna pivot them around the blade of the knife, and we're just gonna spin that when it animates. It's gonna be really, really dead simple. So we're gonna go ahead. We're gonna call this, let's say, spiral pivot. It's all zeroed out, which is great. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to grab a spiral line, and I'm just going to turn these off for now so I can, I'm not worrying about them too much. Make sure this is set to two-sided. Yep. And I'm just going to drag the spiral line a little bit out. I'm just going to put it like this. So here we have a little kind of spiral line. You can see it's kind of moving out from there. And then what we're going to do is I'm just going to duplicate it. I'm going to, invert this position. I'm going to invert this rotation. Yeah, what I'll do, Miles, is I'll drop this workshop folder into the channel as well once we'll finish today, so that way you guys have something. But please keep in mind that if I see, if you hand this to me, if you hand in a modified version of this as your visual effects, that will not look very good, okay? So this is perfectly fine to look at for reference. You're totally welcome to use these elements and stuff. Just yeah, just don't expect that this could be kind of the be-all end-all of your work. So you can actually see that already, even with just a very simple ellipsis shape stretched out over the quad, it looks surprisingly decent. So we're going to duplicate it a couple more times. I'm going to chuck it over, over this way. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees so it's facing out that way. And I'll just do it one more time on the other direction. We'll just set it to negative this. And look at that. So there we go. We have our 4 little spiral things. If I drag, and in this case, I might have to put this spiral pivot under the sword because we want these to move together, right? You can see that looks kind of decent. We can kind of already see one problem though, is that it's not really moving around the shape. So this is where we could start to get a bit fancier, and we could say, okay, actually, maybe if I set, let's say this on, is this gonna be big enough? Maybe. Yeah, maybe if we set our proportional edit size quite high, and we grab it in this plane, we move it out like this, and move it out to the left a bit as well. Yeah, let's try that. Let's give that a shot. Let's see how that looks like in our. And the great thing is as well, because we're moving this as an OBJ, you can see that we're not actually necessarily changing we're not necessarily changing anything with regards to our shader at all, right? We're just really changing this, and our UVs stay the same. All our UVs are laid out the same way, but this is just arranged differently. You can see that kind of works a little bit. The big problem with it already is that if I go ahead and just move this back a bit, let's move it, let's say Y like that. Let's move it in Z, move it X a bit as well. Yeah, move like that, let's say. And again, we're getting a bit fussy here, and we could probably do this better with a spiral export or something of the sort. You can start to see that some of our spirals are starting to wrap a bit better. Now the problem is, you can see this one's not wrapping at all, right? And that's because the rotation has to be the right way around. So we have to rotate this to be facing the right direction. So let's have let's go 180. Okay, cool. That's the right rotation, right? So we'll just delete these ones because these ones are wrong. We'll duplicate it, and we're gonna put it over here on the X instead. So for this one to rotate, we maybe have to have it at 90. Nope, we have to have it at 270. Okay, that's correct now. We duplicate it again. We put it at negative Z. Spiral graph, yeah. Let me snipping tool this one for you guys. And then this needs to be 180. Oh, sorry, nope. Needs to be 90. Nope. Needs to be negative 90. Oh, sorry, just needs to be 0. That's my bad. That's the easy one, right? And then we'll paste this over here, and this needs to be 90. Okay, cool. So now we've got these cool little spiral pieces on the blade that look pretty sick. And we could go ahead, we could change this X value as well. We could say, oh, actually maybe it should be a little, oh, nope, that's really unhappy with that. We could go through, we could change this to maybe like -15 to make it a little bit further out. -15, -15, -15. So that way it's a little bit further out from the sword, okay? And again, this is not a complex system, you know, you could build this with just a mesh and a texture, right? The fact that we're doing it in a shader like this is arguably pointless. We could just be doing this with a texture. It would be totally fine. And the cool thing about this is because we put this all under a pivot point, look what happens when we spin this. We get our spiral motion, right? Look at that. So let's go ahead. We'll put all these pieces together now. Excellent, you know, great work. Good job, us. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the spiral lines to not have shadows, because, you know, these are glowing kind of lines. They're, you know, some heavenly sword, right? This isn't a an actual you know, strip or piece of cloth or something like that. And let's go ahead and let's start animating it, right? Because I want you guys to look at animation this. I don't want you guys to just build nice little shaders. So let's go ahead. Let's drag the scrubber. Let's hit record, and let's start keyframing this bad boy. So you can see we've got the sword coming in, flies in. Cool, great. So let's start off by animating our spirals, right? So let's go ahead. We'll make our. Let's add a keyframe. So we're gonna add. We're gonna make them start off at 1 scale. So we'll just go delete and hit 1, and now we have a keyframe for all the scales, and you can see that here we have a keyframe for all the scales. Okay, and we want to fly in, and we want to hit, and once we hit, we want to very quickly. Once we hit, so if I copy these, right, paste them here, we want to have 1 scale the whole way through there, and once we hit, we want to scale down quite quickly. So we're going to scale them down to 0. So you're going to see you're going to scale down like that. And maybe if we want to be fancy, we could even make them scale only in Y and not in Z. So we can scale like this. And then make them scale, and so they go. Oh yeah, it's really weird. I hate that. Never mind, I take that back. We should keep this at 0. And then, so we'll move them in. Maybe we'll move this back a bit so it happens just before impact. So by the time it lands in, it moves away pretty naturally. Then let's go ahead, let's start rotating it, right? Because we want to make it spin around. So we'll go ahead. We know that our first rotation is fine. We know we want to start at 0. And we're going to rotate around our local y-axis. So let's just spin this a ton. Let's just set this to, I don't know, let's set it to 360 for now. Let's have a look at that. Okay, so it's going to go, and bam. Cool, that's fine. That seems fine, right? Let's play that back. If I look at the game view, it's maybe happening a bit fast, and our camera angle isn't really the best, but you know, that seems fine. Cool. So, well then what do we want? Well, we want our explosion to not be doing this, right, for sure. So let's go back to our first frame. You know, this explosion should be off, so we're going to drag our pulse all the way to the left. Again, you know, our recorder's set on, and this object is a child of this, and it knows that it can change this value. You can see when we did that, this thing turns red, this line turns red, this box turns red. That means that there's a keyframe there, okay? And you see now in our little thing, we have shockwave plane, mesh render, dot material, dot pulse. And this is why we named it shockwave plane, right? Because in my scene, because I'm an idiot, I left them all called default. So I had every single object saying here, default mesh renderer, right? And that is an absolute nightmare when you have 10 plus custom meshes doing things for you, okay? So please, 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 make sure that you bind proper naming conventions, because if you don't, you are going to have a real pain at the end of the day. Cool. So we want that to be set off to 0, and we're going to go here and do the same thing. We're just going to turn that off, okay? Because obviously these shouldn't be on. So we're going to fly in, bam. This is going to shrink down. We've landed here. And let's go ahead and let's start making these pulse outs. We're gonna grab these keyframes, we're gonna paste them back over here, or you know, we can just wiggle this to get it to chuck a keyframe in, or we can click over here and say add key, and then we're gonna expand outwards. So, and let's go back over to this one, and so let's play that. Okay. Well, I mean, that's functional, right? We're moving the things out. Okay, can anyone guess and tell me why they think this looks like crap? Any takers for why this looks really poor? Because at this point, this isn't an issue with our shader. Our shaders work great. We can make them look pretty by, you know, dragging it. I can go. Why does it look poor when we play it like this? Angled impact, yep, that's the problem, for sure. Lighting, yeah, lighting's really crud in this scene. Constant rate of expansion, yeah, constant rate of expansion is really hitting hard. Explosion should also follow the shockwave. Do you mean it should be like wider down or Oh, I see, yeah, okay, cool. So they should be like not actually in sync, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we could, I mean, and this is where, you know, you want to start looking into curves and you want to say, okay, cool. Well, you know, also as well, there's a pretty big issue where, like, you look here, we land, right? There are 3, probably arguably 4 frames, but there's nothing happening, right? That's kind of not cool. So that's a pretty big problem, right, already. So let's go ahead, you know, let's make this right tangent, let's make it free. Because we want this to, bam, and we want it to, like, you know, we want this to spike up, right? We want it to be like, this is probably arguably now too fast, right? So we have to add a keyframe here and kind of pull it back down a bit. So there you go. Now we kind of get that nice smooth expansion, right? And we do the same for the other one as well. Let's go ahead and let's turn it to free, and we'll say, okay, cool. So we land, and then yeah, big explosion. And then, oh, it's still, you know, still a bit fast up here. So we'll like pull this down, kind of. Oh, don't want it to be both tangents to be linear. No, let's go auto here, and we'll just drag this bit down a bit. So it's just a bit more. Okay, not quite that slow. That's big like this, yeah. That's better. Okay, well that's already looking a lot better, right? So keep in mind that it's and you're absolutely right as well. Like the angle of impact's important as well. So, you know, we've got this plane here. Okay, cool. What are we gonna? You know, we can't do much about that, I guess. It's a bit hard to change how this plane's working. But you know, this explosion cone, we could angle this to look more this way. There's nothing stopping us from doing that, right? And that suddenly sells it a lot more, right? Like that looks a lot more real than it did looking straight up. So that's already a bit better, right? Okay, cool. But again, you know, an effect is a lot of things. So we're also missing a bit of color in juice, right? Because this here is white, this thing here is white. It's all just, you know, degrees of white. And it's additive, which is great. But additive white on white is just gonna, you know, it's just gonna bloom to white. So let's go ahead and let's fix a couple of problems. Let's go ahead and let's add another directional light. You know, apply some basic lighting principles. Let's add a little fill light. It's gonna make it rotated differently. I'm gonna give it a bit of a colder blue color. Gonna chuck the intensity down. And you're seeing already that this is gonna make the scene look a little bit more real. You know, because we've got not just one shade of lighting, which is nice. So you see we'll fly in. I mean, the sword's still a bit, you know, dull. Yeah, so that's another thing as well. So the ground is, you know, would be nice if it was darker for contrast. Yeah, definitely. As well, you know, we don't have a crack texture or anything, right? So at the moment, we're just kind of just hacking it together. But you know, what if we just get a bit bit lazy here? Let's not make a texture. You know, let's you know, we have cubes, right? We made a sword out of cubes. We can make a crack out of cubes. Yeah, we can make some reverse rotations to the sword. Yeah, it'd be really cool if the spirals go one way and the sword went another, right? And this isn't complex shader work. This isn't complex code by any means. I love it. Look at that. That's what we're talking about, right? I like it. I like the explosion already. And so let's go ahead and let's like add some cracks and stuff, because you know, part of the reason why it probably feels so dry is it's like it's a big explosion, but like what happens to the wall? You know, what happens to the ground? One of the first things I found when I was playing around with my example is that it has really cool like juicy like you know massive explosion. So it's like wind up, and then like hits the wall. It's like this tiny little crack, and you're like, what? What happened? You know, that doesn't make sense, right? Your brain's trying to figure out logically what could have caused that, and it's like, that's not real. Like, I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that crap at all. So let's go ahead and let's add some cracks, right? So I'm gonna make a new empty game object. I'm gonna call it cracks. That way I've kind of captured them all together, right? And I'm gonna go ahead. I'm just gonna make a 3D cube. I'm gonna set this up for how this should look. I'm gonna make, you know, some small little cubes. I'll make them. No, I'll make them just cubes, and I'll just work with cubes today. So let's rotate them. I'll chuck them into the ground a bit. You know, we'll rotate another one. We'll drag it over here. You know, I'll scale it up some. You know, whatever. You know, like we could get like really fancy here, right? You know, you guys are the artists here. You guys understand. We could spend hours making this pretty little crack and properly, you know, actually making it out of a mesh and you know, not just cheating and hacking the way through the way that we are now. But here's the thing, right? Am I fussed that this has some grey box assets? No. As a player, I'm not fussed that this looks like something really a kindergartner could probably build out of a couple of bits of Lego. The important thing is that the effect is there to really sell it, right? Like this is starting to look now like a crack, starting to feel like, okay, cool, yeah, maybe that's where the sword got lodged, you know, this is kind of making a bit more sense materially and physically, because that's the thing, right? Like when you play a first-person shooter and you shoot a wall, you expect to see little sparks fly up, you expect to see a hit decal, because if you don't have those things, how in God's earth is that ability that they're going to hurt someone in a video game? So it's really important to think about not just, you know, the I guess fancy elements of your effect, the textures, the shaders, the you know, beautifully keyframed or curved animations. Think about the simple things. Think about the fact that you're throwing a big donkin sword into the ground, and a big donkin sword is going to cause some damage. So, you know, better mathematically cause some damage in this scene. And so there we go. So we got this little cool little crack, and it's a bit messy. I don't really like that one. Maybe I'll pull it back and drag it up a bit to kind of fill in the rest. Yeah, it's just, nope, wrong way. Let's pull it this way. Ugh. I hate it already, but you know what? We're just gonna live with it, because at the end of the day, this isn't supposed to be a perfect final setup, right? Cool. So we've got this little crack now. Let's have a look at it. Awesome. It's already looking like 10 times better, right? So if it's sitting there already and it flies in, that's a bit cheating, right? Yeah, 100%. Like I don't mind if you guys want to build a basic attack or a stylized effect. There's a lot of hacks I did on my end to make a thing. The key thing is though is to understand why it is the way that it is. I will not accept you giving me a bunch of cubes like this and telling me that it's supposed to be a hyper realistic 3D Call of Duty ripoff, right? That's not true. No one's gonna buy that. But I will accept it if you say, you know, it's a low poly game, and you just use, you know, flat colors and stuff like that. And again, keep in mind there's some degrees of flexibility there. So, you know, the cracks, I don't expect you to texture a crack for me. If you have the geometry in there and stuff, it's kind of understandable. I don't want you to texture an environment. That's not the assignment at all. I don't want you to texture a sword. That's not the assignment at all. If it's important to your thing that it has a mesh, then make a mesh. But if you need to build it out of boxes and stuff, just to convey, you know, what's happening here, that's also totally fine. So I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna grab this last cube, drag it up a bit like that. Cool. Maybe I'll drag this one a bit down, but ridiculous. Cool. Look at that. Awesome little weird little rock patch. Okay. Maybe I'll rotate some of them as well. Oh, look at this, getting fancy. And again, you know, like, I think keep in mind, like, this approach goes just beyond visual effects as well. You know, there's a lot you can achieve with just very simple pieces. So cool. We've got these cubes now. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's previous again. Now we want these to be invisible, so we're just gonna chuck them below the map, right? Is that really a great idea if you had a world full of platforms and these are all paper-thin platforms? No, hell no. Terrible idea. Do we live in that world? Evidently not. You know, that's fine. So we're gonna go ahead, and at this point, we're gonna keep them here. I'm just gonna keyframe them back to same position again. So we've got add key. So they want to stay in, and then at this, maybe even at this, yeah, at this point here, so we're gonna keyframe them just before. They're not gonna be there at all. And at this point, I'm gonna like scale them up. I'm gonna make them bulky. I'm gonna like, so see it's gonna jump up a bit. Maybe we'll keep the same scale for now. And then maybe we'll drag this keyframe out a bit, and like we'll keyframe a scale as well here. 1.2. Please let me hit it. There we go. 1.25. Particularly as well, like Y will make this look really juicy. So it's like, and then I just need to make them drop back down a little bit. So it's almost like they're kind of settling back into the earth. So 1. Oh, look at that. Easy peasy. So you see now, it flies in, and it bulks out. Now I think I've messed up my scale a bit here, because I didn't drop some keyframes back in here. But again, just play around with this. You can see, and we'll probably want to go to our curves and maybe have a look at our scale and say, maybe this shouldn't be flat, it should be auto, to give that nice, punchy explosion look. Same with this one, probably auto. And if you wanted to be actually, proper, you could probably go in and have some weighted curves and really improve that a lot. And again, just make sure in this case that it makes sense and looks correct. And that looks really good, right? Because as the explosion goes out, kind of pulls them back, and they kind of settle back down into the earth. And so again, you could get really fancy with shaders and stuff, and I know I did for sure, because that's where my expertise, I guess, lies. But you could also just achieve a lot with just some very basic meshes and some very basic cubes. It's no obligation by any means to go above and beyond and build this super stylized, crazy god shader that's going to do everything. You can do a lot with squash and stretch. You can do certainly a hell of a lot with just a basic explanation of meshes and moving them around. So let's go ahead, let's add a couple more little bits in before we wrap it up. So let's go ahead and, one of the great things about us having this set up as a empty game object is I can just go ahead and I can just rotate this, I can keep the camera exactly where it is. And I just click play, and now it's coming in from a slightly different angle, and I get to see it from a different spot, which is just great, right? Now you might be talking, might be neater about how how it looks and stuff, but I think for now won't worry about it too much. Jack, make sure that those effects are parented underneath your VFX. If they're not parented, you're not going to be able to animate them. And make sure you're not animating them from down here. Don't try and edit this or edit this. Make sure you're animating this part here. So go to the mesh. Open up this little tab down the bottom and change the values down here, okay? Cool beans. So, let's as a final note, let's have a wee think about our idle, okay? Because at the moment we're doing all this, and you know what, like, I'm kind of okay with us just just sitting here. It would be nice if it's kind of neatly wrapped up. And we could probably actually do that, by keeping it here and then maybe shrinking it into the ground or something like that. But for now, let's just accept that it just hard cuts back to exiting. So let's go ahead. I can left click at the top keyframe at the very top to select all of them, or I can just drag select these. I'm just gonna copy them. I'm gonna go to idle, and I'm just gonna hit paste. Okay.
It doesn't appear spectrum the effect. The pulse setting there, there's only white, there's no blue ray effect.
Sorry, what's that last part I heard? Oh, the pulse doesn't appear in the inspector.
No, I mean the pulse doesn't animate because there's no red and blue.
Wait, there's no. Sorry, what was like the absolute last was your
There's nothing animated there.
Okay, so you should. So make sure that the record button's set. Make sure your material is.
Where is it?
The record button is just on the left-hand side of the animator. Okay, or the animation clip. Sorry, so it's just down here. Okay, this button here.
Okay.
Yeah, and with that selected, this bar will be red, and that's when you can drag this around and animate this. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So then make sure you paste all that into the idle, and you'll see if you preview it now, right, that it's actually over here in the scene, just floating up in space, really. It's particularly if you have an effect that's like, if you wanted to get fancy, you could totally make an effect that had a real idle where these just kind of spin around, or pre-animate or something like that, where it bobs up and down and then it jumps into the thing. But particularly when you have an animation that just starts off somewhere, now we know that when we go from the idle to the play, we'll start at the exact same point. So if we go ahead and we just if I for instance actually rotate this, let's just do this real quick. Let's go animation. Let's have a look at the idles. It's off to that side. So let's just rotate the VFX until I can actually see it. Oh, let's delete that. Sorry, I actually need to put some keyframes for those two things in there. Let's go ahead. Let's preview. Let's rotate it until I can see it. Will I ever be able to see it? Oh, I won't ever be able to see it. That's my bad. Let's just cheat. Let's drag this further out. Let's go ahead. Let's make it set up so we can definitely see it. Let's preview it again. Okay, cool. There we go. And so now if we hit play and we go to our animator tab, which is on this. If I hit this trigger play, you can see it slams into the ground and plays that animation properly for us. Again, you know, I hit the play and plays that properly. Cool, just like that. Okay. Any questions on that last little bit about the idle? Nope. Okie dokie. Okay, let's look, I said if we had time we would do some chromatic aberration and distortion. Do we still want to tackle that, or do we want to tidy up the effects that we're working on currently, or do we want to tackle something else? So your options are actually, you know what we'll do? Yeah, we're gonna do three options. Okay, we have setting it to play with button press. We're gonna have tidying up existing, and then we're gonna have chromatic aberration / sampling. Those are your three options, okay? You have 30 seconds to vote, and we have 10 minutes. So, okay, well, that seems to be a fairly unanimous setup. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and do that then. Okay, this one might actually not take too long, so we might actually have time for one of the other ones. If you guys vote for the other ones as well, like you can vote for multiple ones. We'll do the play button, and then we'll see how we go with the time. Let's go back to week 10. I'm gonna right click, you're gonna go create C# script, and we're just gonna go play animator. Okay, gonna call it very, very simple, play animator. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna delete this bit here, don't really need this. I'm gonna add public animator. I'm gonna call this VFX animator. And down here, I'm just going to go if input dot get key down key code dot, let's say E. We're gonna say VFX animator dot set trigger play. And there we have it, guys. We have achieved it. Good job. A+. I mean, not really A+. This is it's not quite A+ yet, okay? But that's good. It's working, okay? So we're gonna go ahead. We made the script. Okay, let me snip that real quick for you. Actually, I'll drag this over here. You'll be able to see this all. So here's the script, okay? We're gonna go ahead. We're gonna drag the script onto the object. I'm gonna drag the animator into that VFX animator slot. And obviously my trigger is called play, so just please keep in mind if you called your trigger play with a lowercase p, it needs to be a lowercase p here, okay? If you set it to be called hot potato, it needs to be called hot potato with the exact same naming convention, okay? We're gonna hit play, we're gonna hit E, and it's gonna play. There we go. There is your button press playing the animation. Just like that. Okay. Last little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to drag in a little script I've written a long time ago that you guys are welcome to use. Doesn't bother me at all, so please don't feel like you're cheating or anything by using this or having this in your project, okay? It's called gradient to texture. Dropping this in to the channel as well. This is a nice little thing I wrote a long time ago. I'm gonna drag it on. I'm gonna set up an export path, which has to be something like this: assets slash. I'm gonna set up to be the folders I'm working in, so week 10. And my export name is just gonna be. I'm gonna call it gradient. Set the resolution to 128. So what this does is it allows you to build a little gradient in the inspector over here. So I'm going to set it to be white, and then I'm going to set it to be, actually I'm going to set it to be the other way around. So we have white at the right hand side, we'll have transparent over here, set it to transparent here. Actually we'll just do it with color, it should be easier that way. We'll do black down here, and then we'll maybe have some, like, I don't know, let's say some orange over here. And that's kind of like a nice muddy orange, and we'll do like a cool orangey glow over here, yeah? Cool. I'm gonna hit export, and that's gonna give me a little gradient texture in my project view, okay? That's quite nice. I'm gonna set it to clamp, because I don't want it to repeat. I don't want to, when I go beyond the texture, I just want to turn the color here, I want to turn it down here. I don't want to go back up to the top, okay? I'm going to go ahead and I can just drag this in to, let's say, our explosion. Actually, no, let's drag into our shockwave. This is very small. And I'm going to drag this in. And I'm just going to do a bit of simple math here. We're going to go chuck this into the Y, chuck this into the UV2. And then I'm going to pass the vector 3 of the colors into the color slot. Okay, so R, G, B. Just want to really quickly show you guys how sampling a gradient texture in these cases can make this look so much more satisfying. Okay, so go back to this animation real quick. Let's play at the play. You see now, when it lands, we're gonna get this really bright white, and it's gonna fade off to a nice orange outside of it. And that's immediately going to make our thing look a lot more real and a lot more visually, thematically framed, okay? Cool. So that's a gradient texture thing really quickly. I will drop the workshop files to you guys again, so don't feel too bad if I just like really quickly breeze over that. I understand I just like jumped through two to 5 things there, so yeah, don't stress too much, okay? And let's have a look at this chromatic aberration. So, because I know at least one student's come to me asking about distortion, and you can do distortion. So let's go ahead and let's make a new file called distortion. We're going to create a new unlit graph, okay? And we're going to call this distort. I'm going to make a material from it. pull that distort. And let's so let's have a really quick setup, and I'm gonna, this is recorded, so you guys might have to come back to this. And if you do have any questions about doing this again, just please flick me a message. It is a bit frustrating how this is set up, but don't worry about it too much. So you're going to have to go ahead and you're going to have to go to Edit, Project Settings, and here we go. So you want to go to Project Settings, and you're going to have this Universal RP High Quality. Okay, you're going to double click on it. It's going to reveal it in your thing, which is actually under Asset Settings, Universal RP High Quality. You're going to make sure that you have depth texture and opaque texture set to ticked. Okay. Those two things are required for doing screen sampling shaders. Okay. Now screen sampling shaders are quite fancy. All they're going to do is they're going to read the data behind them. Okay. So we're going to make sure it's set to transparent. We're going to set it to alpha this time. I'm going to set the alpha clip threshold to 0. And just as a sanity check, I'm just going to go scene color, and I'm just going to pass this into our out. Okay, we're going to hit save. I'm going to build a quad, and I'm going to give it this distort material. So you could you could do what we did last week, Luke, and just sample a gradient, or alternatively, you could build a texture in Photoshop and essentially use you essentially pass in that 0 to 1 value as an X or a Y coordinate. You imagine you using it like a UV, so you're essentially sampling on the UV, and you could use that to sample the Photoshop file. So anyways, we go ahead and we built this thing, and this quad has this texture applied to it. If I go ahead, I even make sure it says, two-sided. It's definitely two-sided. I promise you to God it's two-sided. And it's got a little shadow, but there's nothing behind it, right? Only way you can actually tell it is because there's a little bit more jaggedness, right? And that's just because this part here is not being drawn in the same way that this part here is being drawn. This has some nice MSSAA applied, and this can't really have that being applied because we're using sampling of scene color. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm just going to be a bit sneaky, and I'm going to do a multiply. I'm going to say, you know what, the color in here, I'm going to multiply it by, 0.5. It's going to make it darker. I'm going to pass that back into the color just so you guys can see what this does. And you see now we have a little glass tint that just tints the color behind it. Okay. Now this is somewhat equivalent to really just, having something with an alpha on it, right? But the great thing about this is you can start to do some pretty cool things. So let's say we currently are just passing in our default UVs, right? We can pass in something called screen position. And what we could do is we can even add a little bit of value to this. Now I'm going to only add a very, very small amount of value because our screen's quite big. I'm going to pass that in instead. I hit save asset and we'll see what happens. Okay, so if we line this up, you're going to see that it's distorting the space around it. We're seeing here something that is not aligned with this. Okay. If I drag this, maybe if I just preview this animation, so you can see that there's quite clearly a separation from this and this. Okay. So you can start to get some really cool little different techniques here. Now, really, really quickly, I'm not actually sure if this is going to work, so this is a bit of a risk. But let's take this risk, okay? I'm going to define 3 vector 3s, and I'm going to sample 3 different colors around our screen position and figure out RGB channels that way, and I'm going to put them on that way together, okay? So what we're going to do is, let's say make this way. Actually, you know what, we'll make it simple. 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, and we'll make this one go down. So 0, negative 1, okay? I'm going to multiply them all by a very small number because we don't want to, we don't want to get too crazy here. We want it to be relatively small distance that we're going to chromatically aberrate by. Okay. So vector 1. Doop. Doop. And doop. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sample 3 scene colors. We're going to do this very fast, so don't sweat too much if you're a little bit lost. It's okay. So doop. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Doop and doop. Just going to connect this all up. Chuck this in there, chuck this in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to split these, because we only want to look at one channel from each of these 3 scene colors. Now keep in mind, this is a bad way of doing generic chromatic aberration, but this is a really cool way of doing it. For instance, if you were trying to chromatically aberrate only a very small part of the space, because you could quite easily set it up to not sample very far when it's at the edges of the quad, and sample a lot when it's at the middle of the quad. If we have time, we'll maybe do that, but I don't think we will. Okay. So then we're going to grab a vector 3, and we're going to stitch our scene back together from these 3 values, and we're going to chuck it into color. We're going to hit save asset, and here's the test. Yeah, that's working. Look at that. Isn't that just hella trippy? And you can see that when the quad's not in the way, we don't get that really weird effect. If we turn off gizmos, so you can see it a bit more clearly. You can see that with the quad there, it's quite clearly very screwy. Now, one thing to note is that our opaque pieces are rendering properly, but these transparent additive bits are not. And that's because of render order. I think if we set this to, if we set this to sufficiently far, so 4000 let's say, ooh, so this is where we're gonna get a little bit complex. So this shader would technically work in some ways, but the problem is that we're ignoring, we're not enabling things that don't write properly to the depth buffer. So you'd have to have a look more clearly into how exactly to achieve this with something that's additive, but things that are transparent or structured in that way would work perfectly fine. But you can see just like that we could achieve quite a cool chromatic aberration effect. And so you could use that maybe to, if you scale this up, to draw some attention to this object or something of the sort. And again, we could also go ahead and in our little shader, we could even make it so that we go ahead and get really fancy very quickly. Take this value, we multiply it, and I'm gonna split and vector 2. So we use the exact same thing we've done before with regards to using a distance from the center of the quad. I'm going to go ahead and chuck this into our we have to do a multiply and a 1 minus because we want it to be inverted. Chuck that in there. Chuck these in here. And drag this over here. Hit save asset. And now you can see that as it gets closer to the middle of the quad, make this 1, 1, 1. You can see that the middle of the quad heavily distorts and the edge of the quad doesn't at all. Look at that. So anyway, that was very quickly, very, very quickly, a little bit of chromatic aberration and a little bit of explanation about how you could set up something to sample a scene color behind it. I'll drop this into the channel as well, so you're welcome to have a look at this in your own time. Obviously, this is not a very good effect to use right now as it's currently evidently overriding our additive, but if you look up online how to get a scene color to sample additive, you'll probably find some results there. So cool. We'll set this to off. I'll chuck this, I'll plonk this somewhere. It's maybe not too far in the way. Yeah, maybe I'll just chuck it up here and I'll set it to like 10 by 4, let's say. So if you want to have a look through that quad and see it, you can just see it from this direction. Cool. Okie dokie. Thank you so much for tuning in today, guys. Had a lot of fun. working with you guys and building some cool little things. I'd love it if you guys will drop what dinky swords or weird swords you guys have at the in the channel as well. I love seeing you guys work and seeing what you guys got up to. You guys didn't get up to much. That's also okay. don't feel bad or anything of the sort. If we rush through some of these pieces and you just have the really basic parts, because at the end of the day, like I said, you know, you could build 100 effects, but oftentimes very basic effects will actually go a very, very long way. Like at the end of the day, that distortion effect, right? Really technically cool, but maybe is it as usable as we thought? Not really sure, right? So keep in mind that even just with basic effects like this, you can achieve a hell of a lot. So awesome. Thanks so much, guys. I'll just wrap up this into a zip again. And I think that's about it. Also, feel free to message as well if you have any thoughts or questions about the work you're planning on building. If you have any concerns, you're like, oh, maybe this is too much, or I'm not sure where to go with this, please do reach out and get in touch. That looks really dope. Love it, Luke. Good stuff. Okie dokie. Thanks so much, guys. And I will see you next week. Have fun. Be good. Ciao.